Preface. It being usual for authors, in prefaces, to render an account of the occasion which gave birth to their writings, and to acquaint the reader with the design and scope of their discourses, I thought it convenient to continue a custom approved by many illustrious examples. PGVJ. The motive of publishing this tract is not the intercession of friends, for none had ever the view of any part of it, and that it is not design of applause that has engaged me in this undertaking. The care I have had to conceal my name will, I suppose, free me from such suspicion. The chief inducement proceeds from an inclination to mankind to instruct them to preserve and prolong their lives, thereby to prevent them from using fraudulent quack medicines, which are now become so universally vendible amongst them, or advising with such as are wholly ignorant. And I should think myself sufficiently rewarded for my pains, if I could arrive to PGVJ the point of reforming the abuses of the present, and restoring the simplicity of the ancient practice, by laying open to the world my observations of the pretended and fallacious methodus medendi, and the insignificancy of a great part of their materia medica. And here I will particularly address myself to all those persons concerned with me, who are the people or patients, and the physicians with their followers, the chirurgeons and apothecaries. This discourse is chiefly intended for the first, it being they who are most highly injured by the unwarrantable practices of those we have therein accused. For although many understanding persons among the PGVJ people are sufficiently satisfied of the abuses we have mentioned, and that it is of absolute necessity some reformation should be made, yet all are not thus persuaded, for we may daily observe that many who are less discerning, being deceived by an imaginary good, covet their own ruin, and unless they be given to understand which is the evil and which is the good, by persons they have reason to confide in, they must necessarily run much hazard. I have here endeavored to undeceive them, which I should despair of, did I only foresee inconveniencies afar off, the vulgar being led by sense, and not by probable conjectures. But since they PG Roman 9 do now actually labor under many, and those obvious inconveniencies, how short soever their sight be, the senses of feeling being no less acute in them than in others, I persuade myself, they will readily assent to those truths I have largely discovered. And here must I venture through all the barricadoes and the fortifications of popular resentment. But satires, like incision, become necessary when the humor rankles, and the wound threatens mortification, when advice ceases to work, when loss, experience, and disaster will not convince, then satire reforms, by making the error we embrace ridiculous. Shame works to make us forsake a thing, PGX, which instruction augments, or persuasion could have no effect upon. Many and great abuses, and of the last importance to the people, have urged my duty and demanded my assistance. And if in my essay on health, I do persuade my reader to the regimen I have here laid down, he may assure himself of that golden panacea, that elixir salutis, at no other charge, but in cura sapsum. It would by many be expected that I should make an apology for the great liberties I have taken in my general treatment of the whole faculty, in which I claim the allowed exception that there are some few very eminent and worthy of the PGXJ first honors and dignity of physic, and who, by their unwearied labor of body and application of mind, have run through the courses of anatomy, botany, chemistry, and Galenic pharmacy, and no less acquainted with the virtues, faults, and preparations, compositions and doses of vegetables, animals, minerals, and all the shop medicines. And yet, nevertheless, the profession of physic, though arrived to much greater improvement than before, its dignity and degrees are so despicably fallen that the very lowest of people, as well women as men, usurp the title. And how monstrous it is to see that mob of empirics, as barbers, PGZJ farriers, and mountebanks, overreach and bubble the people both of their lives and money. As I would not arrogate to myself the performance of another, I must not here forget to acknowledge that I have borrowed from the judicious author of a late excellent discourse concerning some few passages of the state of physic, and the regulation of its practice. I suppose it will be easily imagined that I could have spoken the same things in other words, but my respect to the memory of that worthy person disposes me to believe they will sound better and be more effectual in his own language. PGZJ, the following appendix received its birth in answer to some of the most formidable of the many pamphlets that were crowded upon the people at the first report, we had of the miserable state of the Marsalians by the plague, which had not been but for the same plausible end of being serviceable to the nation, by detecting their errors and setting aside the clashing opinions of those literati, which has rather given alarm than a security to the people. To conclude, if in speaking the truth there is no blame, but rather commendation, I then need not apologize for the freedom I've used in exploding the great PG Roman 14 varieties and abuses in both the theory and practice of physic. And although the attempt should not answer equal to the good intention I've had for the public, yet I shall demand that justice of the world, and with Horace. Quod verum ac descens, curo and rogo, and omnes in hoc sum. Page 1. Medicina Flagellata, or the Dr. Scarify 500. It is most certain that all nations, even the most barbarous, have in all ages made use of medicines to ease their pains, to regain or preserve health, the greatest among earthly felicities, in the absence whereof we cannot relish any of those numerous enjoyments, which the bountiful Page 2 Creator hath plentifully bestowed on us, so that the most sublime ancient philosophers who excluded all other external good from being necessary to the well-being of man, placing happiness only in the things whereof we cannot be deprived, yet out of them they accepted health, knowing there was so near a connection between the soul and body that the one could not be disordered in its functions, but the other would be disturbed in its operations. Hence it is that no part of human knowledge can be of greater moment than what directs to remedies and means of relief under those infirmities to which the whole race of man is heir to, so that even amongst the wisest, that science or art whereby those defects we call diseases were repaired was always accounted divine. Pg 3 For that God is the first and chief physician, hath been the constant faith of all ages, and that physicians were accounted the sons of gods, was commendably asserted by Galen, and therefore it was truly spoken that medicines were the hand of God, their meriting only such names as related to their divine original. Thus a certain antidote was called equal to God, another given by God, another divine. Several compositions had the inscription or sacred, and 'twas the common belief among the heathens that so great a knowledge in physic came by inspiration, and St. Austin is of the same opinion in his 105. De who saith, corporis medicina, si altius rerum origins repetas, non invenitur under ad homines maner paturit, nicae dio. It cannot be conceived whence physic Pg 4 should come to man, but from God himself. It is well known how great a name Hippocrates obtained, not only in Greece, which he delivered from the greatest plague, but in remote parts, so that the greatest monarchs of the East and their viceroys were suitors to him, to free their country from that devouring disease, which threatened to exhaust those populous regions of their inhabitants, unless the same person who freed Greece interposed, whom they esteemed divine and sent from the gods, because successful in so great undertakings. Very certain it is, so noble and useful a study were encouraged, yea, and practiced by kings, princes, and philosophers, by the highest, wisest, and best of men, whereof some were honored by statues erected to perpetuate Pg 5 their memoirs, and by many other instances of the public gratitude. So that when I consider what reverence has been paid to this profession, and the professors thereof in all times whereof we have any particular account, I am amazed that in this latter age, wherein it hath received greater improvements than in 2000 years before, and that nevertheless it should be by many neglected, by others slighted, and by some even contemned. After a diligent inquiry into the causes of so strange and sudden an alteration, I could not, in my opinion, so justly ascribe it to defects in the profession, as to those of its professors. Not that I deny that physic may be capable of greater improvements, notwithstanding it might to this day have been maintained at least in Pg 6, the same degree of honor and esteem, which all ages have justly had for it, if the avarice and imprudence of the real, the ignorance and baseness of the pretended artists had not interposed. Under the former I comprise the vulgar physicians, under the latter their dependents the apothecaries, who, I am confident, have caused many of the great inconveniences under which the practice of physic now labors. That the sick are in all cases oppressed with too many medicines and made to loathe and complain of the very cordials, that the expense is made greater and more extravagant by the often confederacy and artifices visible in the new modes of prescribing. And the deaths of the patient, I would not say, is frequently the effect not of the disease, but of pg7, the numerous doses obtruded in the same proportions in every sickness and age, pushing on declining and even departing life, which after its exit makes pots and glasses observed, with the same passions and concern, as the bloody sword is viewed as the instrument of death and mischief. By whom or by what means the purity of physic has sunk into this degeneracy, let us farther examine, and trace it from the first steps of entering into this great abuse. Let us then usher in the young physician, now come from the university, and having spent a great part of his money, if not all, in his education, very wisely for himself considers, which are the most obvious and practiced ways of making himself known, and by what methods he may more easily insinuate himself, and that pg8 he may recover the fortune he has lent the public in his education, which he is resolved they shall now pay him with interest. He is informed, or presently observes, that most or all the families are under the directions of the apothecary, who gives his physic, till he fears the patient will die, and then appoints a physician, who before is prepared to acquit him, by bearing the reproach with the most perfect resignation. And to support this good temper, he is bid to cast his eyes around the kingdom, and consider how they flourish in the common fame, who had the good luck to follow those instructions at their first arrival. Or if he has found out any more effectual medicines, or more compendious or grateful methods of cure, or would imitate the pg9 applauded practice of some few of the most eminent of that profession, whose prescriptions were only to assist, not to overload or suppress nature. This is too bold a stroke, a too dangerous reform in physic. He must previously consider that the number of apothecaries are increased, and that their dependence lieth more on the quantities of medicines in suitable proportions. And notwithstanding a generous and liberal education, by which he has learned to explode the malevolent and useless practice from a great many prescriptions that are now in vogue, he must not dare to refute them. He must obey that great principle of nature to preserve himself. He must conform to the manners of the age and the general practice. He must dispense with his not knowing pg10 whether the medicines are made up according to his prescription. He must wink at the design, ignorance, carelessness, or unfaithfulness of the apothecary, whom he must not any ways disgust, though he in revenge, as well in executing his own interest, may make his dose up with worm-eaten superannuated drugs, wherewith most of them are well stored, which will not work according to the physician's promise and the patient's expectation. The apothecary who here outwits the doctor and assumes the character is here ready at hand to tell his patient that this was no ways accommodated to his temper. Nay, perhaps, he presages to him that it will not work sufficiently, as he may without conjuring or astrology, by which he obtains a reputation of a person more pg11 judicious than the physician making way for his own advantage, by telling the patient that he will prepare a purge that shall work more effectually than the former. This you need not doubt is the same the physician before prescribed, but assuredly made up of better drugs, and so the apothecary executes his design, which is to exclude the physician and prefer himself. The young physician, though he has learned the abuse, yet he has that regard to himself, to make use of that old maxim of the two evils to choose the least, and finding it best suiting his interest, which otherwise might be endangered by the clandestine and underhand dealings of the other, and now finds it necessary to close in with him, and such a one as will join in a mutual application and pg12 advancement of each other. Now are their engines set at work, and the doctor, not to be behindhand, gives a new form to his bills, which he prescribes in terms so obscure that he forces all chance patients to repair to his own apothecary, pretending a particular secret, which only they have a key to unlock, whereas, in effect, it is no other than the commonest of medicines disguised under an unusual name, on design to direct you to that apothecary, between whom and the physician there is a private compact of going snips out of the most unreasonable rates of the said medicines, wherein if you seek a redress, by showing the bill to the doctor, he shall most religiously aver it to be the cheapest he ever read. The consequence whereof, as to your particular is a double fraud, and PG-13 as the apothecaries in general, their numbers bearing the proportion at least 10 to one of noted physicians, to whom allowing his covenant apothecary, who constituting one part of the 10, the remaining 9 parts are compelled either to sit still or to quack for a livelihood, or at least 8 of them for weal. Suppose one part of the 9, a possibility of acquiring competent estates in a way more honest than that of the covenanters, by their wholesome trade of fitting out chirurgeons' chests for sea and supplying country apothecaries with compositions. Lastly, all accomplished physicians are likewise exposed to manifest injuries from the covenant apothecaries, who being sent for by patients after a short essay of a cordial, will overpower them by persuasions to call in a PG-14 doctor, who shall be no other than his covenant physician, by which means the former physician, who by his extraordinary care and skill had obliged the family before, shall be passed by and lose the practice of that patient. And should it happen, the sense of gratitude of the forementioned patient should engage him to continue the use of his former physician, yet this covenant apothecary shall privately cavil at every bill, and impute the appearance of every small pain or symptom, which necessarily in the course of a disease will happen, to his ill address in the art of physic, and shall not give over before he has introduced his covenanter, whose authority in the fraud of physic he supposes to be most necessary. PG-15, but least you should think me overbalanced with a prejudice to those that so much abuse that noble profession. I'll conduct you into their usual road and method of examining their patients, and making enquiry into their diseases, wherewith being acquainted, you may, without any farther conviction, pronounce a verdict. This knack doth chiefly consist in 3 notions, viz. First, that a patient's grievance is either a discernible evident disease, which his own confession makes known to you what it is, or secondly, an inward pain, or thirdly, one of those 2 endemic diseases, a scurvy or consumption, or a fourth, the pox. This is their theory, which is so deeply engrafted on their dura mater, and may be acquired with less industry than PG-16 14 years' study at one of our universities. For so much time is required to make a man grow up a doctor, the formality whereof in most places consists in this elegy, accipiamus pecuniam and dimitamus asinum. If a sick man makes his address to a vulgar physician, he demands his complaint. T'other replies, he is troubled either with a vomiting, looseness, want of stomach, cough, bad digestion, difficulty of breathing, a phtisic, faintness, jaundice, green sickness, dropsy, gout, convulsion fits, palsy, dizziness, or swimming in the brain, spitting of blood, an ague, a continual great heat or fever, and 100. These are all evident diseases the party himself expresses he is troubled with, but his sickness not being an evident disease, which he himself can explain, the vulgar PG-17 doctor concludes it must be either an inward pain or an endemic disease. The patient then making complaint of an inward pain, to his old way of guessing t'other goes, inquiring first in what part. If he answers he feels a pain in the right side, or under the short ribs, he tells him it is an obstruction or stoppage in the liver. If in the left side, in the opposite part, then 'tis a stoppage of the spleen. If in the belly, he it maybe calls it a colic or wind in the guts. If in the back or loins, he persuades him it's gravel, stone, or some other obstruction in the kidneys. If a stitch in the breast, he terms it wind or other times a pleurisy. Lastly, if the party be reduced to a very lean carcass, by reason of a long tedious cough, spitting of blood, or want of stomach, or feebleness, PG-18, or almost any other disease, or pain, then besir he tells him he's in a consumption or at least falling into one, but being troubled with several diseases and pains at once, as running pains, faintness, want of stomach, change of complexion, so as to look a little yellowish, duskish, or greenish. Then t'other whispers him he is troubled with the scurvy. If diseased with ulcers or running sores, red, yellow, blue, or dark spots, pimples or blotches in the face, arms, legs, or any other part of the body, that's determined to be the scurvy likewise, supposing the party to be a sober, discreet person. But if appearing inclined to wantonness by reason of his youth, or sly countenance, then the forementioned disease is to be called the pox. In most diseases of women, they accuse the PG-19 mother. In children, their guess seems far more fallible. For a child within the 6 months being taken ill, restless, and froward, if there appear no evident disease, he ever affirms it's troubled with gripes, upon which he prognosticates that if not speedily remedied, the child will fall into convulsion fits. But this not happening according to his prediction, to prevent the forfeiture of his skill and repute, endeavors to possess the mother and rest of the gossips. It had inward fits. The child being past 6 months, and falling indisposed, then instead of gripes, it is discomposed by breeding of teeth. But having bred all his teeth, and being surprised with any kind of illness, the doctor then avouches it is troubled with worms. In short, take away these 3 words, obstruction, consumption, and PG-20 scurvy, and there will remain 3 dumb doctors, the hackney physician, the prescribing surgeon, and the practicing apothecary. Hitherto we have only discovered to you the ordinary physician's conjecturing compass, whereby he steers his course, to arrive to the knowledge of his patient's diseases. There yet remains we should unlock the other ventricle of his brain, to behold the subtlety of his fancy in groping at the causes of diseases, which, though, the poet declares, felix qui patuit rerum cognoscere causas, to be clothed with the darkest clouds, yet by the virtue of this following principle, aims at this mark immediately, viz., that most diseases are caused by choler, phlegm, melancholy, or abundance of blood. Of these, 2 are supposed to be PG-21 hot, namely, choler and abundance of blood, and the other 2 cold, to wit, phlegm and melancholy, and consequently causes of hot and cold diseases. These 4 universals being reduced to 2 general categories. Under the notion of hot and cold, anyone having but the sense of distinguishing winter from summer may, in the time of an Hixius Doxius, instantly appoint a cause for almost every disease, so that a patient discovering his trouble, it may be a want of stomach, bad digesture, fainting, cough, difficulty of breathing, giddiness, palsy, and 100. His vulgar physician has no more to do but take him by the fist, to feel whether he be hot or cold. If he finds him cold, then summons in his old causes, phlegm and melancholy, which ready, PG-22 and quick pronouncing of the cause upon a mere touch, doth almost stupefy your patient, throw admiration of Scullapian oracle, hitting him in the right vein to a hair's breadth. For, quoth he, indeed, Mr. Doctor, I think you understand my distemper exceedingly well, and have infallibly found out the cause. For every morning as soon as I awake, I spit such a deal of phlegm, and moreover, I must confess myself extremely given to melancholy. This jumping in opinions between them makes Mr. Doctor swell with expectation of a large fee, which the patient most freely forces on him, and so the fool and his monies are soon parted. Now it's 2 to 1, but both are disappointed, the one in his unexperienced judgment, t'other in his fond belief. For state the case, PG-23, the disease takes its growth from choler, or abundance of blood, or any other internal cause. There is scarce 1 in 100 that are indisposed, who is not subject to hawk and spit in the morning, and being reduced to weakness by reason of his trouble, must necessarily be heavy in the passions of the mind, and incident to melancholy thoughts, through the memory of his mortality, occasioned by this infirmity, so that seldom mirth and cheerfulness are housed in indisposed bodies, because they are deficient of that abundance of light and clear spirits required to produce them. No wonder the vulgar is so opinionated in the affair of their temperament, when belabored with a disease, since in their healthful state, it's impossible for a physician to engage their opinion PG-24 otherwise than to believe themselves phlegmatic and melancholy. To return to the point of declaring how the vulgar strives even with violence to be cheated, not in their purses only, but in their fancies and opinion. And in this particular, our women are so violent eager, that if the vulgar physician can but make a true sound upon the treble of their fancy, will produce such a harmony as shall sound his praise through city and country, and without those female instruments, or she-trumpets, it's almost impossible for a vulgarist to arrive to a famous report, who having once by his tongue harmony enchanted the woman, doth by the same cheat subject the opinion of man to his advantage, women generally usurping, and impropriating PG-25 the affair of their husband's health to their own management. For if a man chance to be surprised with sickness, he presently asks his wife what doctor he shall send to, who instantly gives her direction to him that had her by the nose last. In this piece of subtlety, the doctor shows himself no less cunning than the serpent in Genesis, who, to cheat Adam, thought it expedient first to deceive Eve. Now, without any further preamble, I must tell you the humor many a sick woman delights to be coaxed in by the ordinary physician, viz. She loves to be told she is very melancholy, though of never so merry a composure, and in that part of the litany, Mr. Doctor is a perfect reader, For a woman making complaint she is troubled with drowsiness, pg 26 want of stomach, cough, or any other distemper. He answers her, she is in an ill state, and troubled with great and dangerous diseases, and all engendered by melancholy. And then tells her over again, she is very melancholy, and saith he probably occasioned by coarse treats at home, or some unkindness of friends, which makes the poor heart put fingers in her eye, and force a deep sigh or two. And all this possibly for being denied the extravagant charge of a tea equipage, or a new gown on a May day, which being refreshed in her memory, doth certainly assure her the impression of that melancholy to be the original of her trouble, though some months or years past, especially since her physician discovers to her so much, and for so doing admires him no less, intending pg 27 withal to give him an ample testimony to the world of the doctor's great skill. But this is not all. He pursues his business, looks into her eyes, where spying a small wrinkle or two in the inward or lesser angle, he tells her she has had a child or two, namely, a boy or a girl, according to the place of the aforesaid wrinkle in the right or left inward angle. Thence persuades her that at her last lying in, her midwife did not perform her office skillfully, or did not lay her well, whereby she received a great deal of prejudice, as cold, wrenching, displacing of the matrix, and 100, which instance squaring with the premeditated sense and opinion of his she-patient, most women, though never so well accommodated in their labor, being prone to call the behavior of their pg 28 midwife in question, he hath now produced a far greater confidence than before, and last of all, to complete his work now at the going off of his gulled patient, of rendering her thoughts, opinion, and confidence vassals to his service, fame, and advantage, makes one overture more of a great cause of some of her symptoms, declaring to her she is much subject to fits of the mother, occasioning a choking in her throat, and herein they also jump in their sentiments. Scarce one woman in 100 but one time or other is assaulted by those uterine steams, especially upon tempest of any of the passions of fright, fret, anger, love, and 100. If I have reproached the vulgar physician for executing his employ with so little ingenuity, pg 29 far greater reason may move me to condemn the water-gazer, who by the steams of the urine pretends to gratify his patient's nice curiosity of being resolved what was, what is, and what disease is to come, and what is more, some by their great cunning, aiming to discover as much by the urinal as the astrologer by the globe. The fame unto which the English doctor, who some years ago residing at Leyden, promoted himself by his wonderful sagacity in urines, is not unworthy of your note, hundreds, or rather thousands, repairing to this stupendious oracle, to have the state of their bodies described by urine. But when I relate to you the first means that gave birth to our countryman's repute, I shall soon remove your passion of admiring him. Upon his arrival pg 30 at the place aforementioned, he had in his company a bold fellow, that haunted the most noted taverns and tap-houses, who by way of discourse divulged the good fortune that was happened to the town by the arrival of an English doctor, whose great learning and particular skill in urines would soon render him famous to all the inhabitants. This being pronounced with a confidence suitable to the subject, occasioned 3 sick scholars, 2 hectics, 1 hydropical, then present, to make trial of the truth of his words. The next morning, agreeing to mix all their urines in 1 urinal, and commit the carriage of it to him that was dropsical. In the interim, the doctor advertised of it by his companion, which made him so skillful, that when the hydropical scholar presented pg 31 him with the urinal, to know the state of his diseased body, he soon gravely replied, that he observed 3 urines in this 1 urinal, whereof the 2 lowermost parts of the urine appeared to him to be consumptive, and the 3rd that floated at top dropsical, and withal, that their conditions were desperate, and at the expiration of 6 months they should be all lodged in their graves. This admirable dexterity of discerning diseases by the urinal was soon proclaimed by the scholars themselves, who all having finished the course of their lives, within the time prefixed, proved an undoubted argument of his unparalleled parts in the art of physic, which immediately procured him an incredible concourse of people for many years together. pg 32 Another instance of a woman whose husband had a bruise by a fall downstairs, carried his urine to the urine-casting doctor in Moorfields, who pretended likewise to be a conjurer. He, after shaking, seeing little specks of blood float in it, had so much understanding to tell her that the party had received some internal hurt. The woman agreed to this as truth, but demanding by what means he came by it. Upon this he erected a scheme, and in the meantime asked her so many questions that by the drift of her discourse he gathered that he had tumbled downstairs, the woman not minding well what she had said, in the consternation she was in at the hard words he had uttered, supposing he was conjuring up the devil, to be resolved in. The matter told her own words in a PG different title. The woman acknowledged it true, with some admiration, but desired to know how many pair of stairs he might fall down. She had told him before where she lived, and he, considering the place chiefly consisted of low buildings, answered, 2 pair. Nay, now, said she, you are out in your art. He fell 3-story, I'll promise. This put our doctor to his trumps, when having mused a while for an excuse, he shook the urinal again, and asked her if there was all the water her husband had made. No, replied she, I spilt a little in pouring it in. Oh ho, did you so? Said he. Why, that woman was the business that made me mistake, for there went away the other pair of stairs in the urine you spilt. I shall but trouble you with another instance, which explodes PG-30 for this cheat, of what happened in the early practice of the fam doctor. Radcliffe, when at Oxford, of a country woman that brought to him her husband's urine in a glass bottle, very carefully corked up, and after a low courtesy, presented the bottle, desiring the doctor to send a remedy for her husband, who then lay very ill. The doctor, observing the simplicity of this woman, put no other question, but of what profession or trade her husband was of. Who replied, a shoemaker, at which he pours forth the urine in a basin then by him, and after he had supplied it with a like quantity of his own, he gives it her and says, Good woman, carry this to your husband, and bid him fit me with a pair of boots. But she replying, her husband must first take measure. To which he returned, the PG-35 shoemaker might as well judge by the urinal the fitting of his leg, as he in that of his distemper. That the effects of confederacy in promoting a physician to popular vogue are as powerful as sinister and disingenuous, may not only be deduced from the aforesaid narratives, but from the common design of vulgar empirics, who to raise their fame as high as a pyramid, send forth several prating fellows into all public places, taverns, coffee-houses, and ale-houses, to publish their vast abilities, expecting with that bait to hook in as many patients as will swallow it. Others are no less skilled in counterfeiting their great practice, by causing their apothecaries, or others, to call them out of the church at an afternoon sermon, to hasten post to a suborned patient, to the intent the PG-36 world be advertised of the weighty business this doctor is concerned in. Others by their equipage, eminent houses, and occasioning one and the same patient to repair needlessly to them 20 or 30 times, manifest a decoy even taken notice of by the vulgar. These few disingenuous ways do here purposely bring on board, omitting many others, to convince the public that the only means for a physician to advance himself honorably to practice is by discovering his real abilities in curing diseases by quick, certain, and pleasant medicines, and therefore nothing should render his parts more suspicious than by attempting their discovery by such fallacious and ignoble devices. For certainly the conclusion is most sophistical, that because this doctor is drawn in his coach, t'other PG-37 rides on horseback, or another hath his lackey at his heels, therefore he must be excellently qualified in his profession, but vulgus vult discipi. If I now describe, by way of advice to those that are entering upon the study of this divine art, the method of attaining to a point of excellency in it, and that may serve our vulgar for a better rule to distinguish their qualifications by the course they have passed through, for it is most necessarily requisite, our young student should be perfectly instructed in the Latin and Greek tongues, being the universal keys to unlock all those arts and sciences, and no less a grace to the future physicians. In this particular, many of our embryonated physicians that have of late years transported themselves to Leyden and Utrecht to purchase PG-38 a degree have been found very defective, insomuch that I have heard the professors condemn several of them for their shameful imperfection in that which is so great an ornament, and of so absolute an use in the study of physic. Neither can less be suspected of some of the more aged vulgar physicians, making choice to manage their consultations in the vulgar tongue. Secondly, being thus qualified for a student, he ought to apply himself close to the study of philosophy, for which Oxford and Cambridge may justly challenge a preeminence above other universities. Here it is our student learns to speak like a scholar and is informed in the principles of nature and the constitutions of natural bodies, and so receiving a rough draft in his mind is to be accomplished by pg 39, that excellent science of human bodies. But because, according to the first aphorism of the first master Hippocrates, art is long and life short, he ought to engage his diligence to absolve his philosophical course in 2 years at longest, and in the interim, for his recreation and divertisement, enter himself scholar to the gardener of the physic garden, to be acquainted with the effectures of plants, but particularly with those that are familiarly prescribed by practitioners, to prevent being outwitted by herb-women in the markets, and to enable him to give a better answer than is said once of a physician, who having prescribed maidenhair in his bill, the apothecary asked which sort he meant. T'other replied, some of the locks of a virgin. Thirdly, supposing our student, having pg 40 made sufficient progress in philosophy, may now pass to Leyden, and may enter himself into a collegium anatomicum, anatomy being the basis and foundation whereon the weighty structure of physic is to be raised, and unless he acquires more than ordinary knowledge and dexterity in this, will certainly be deceived in the expectation of ever arriving to the honor of an accomplished physician. A proficiency in that part fits him for a collegium medicum institutionum, and afterward for a collegium practicum, and then, 'tis requisite, he should embrace the opportunity of visiting the sick in the hospital twice a week with the physic professor, where he shall examine those patients with all the exactness imaginable, and point at every disease, its symptoms, as it were, with his fingers, pg 41, and afterward propose several cases upon those distempers, demanding from every young student his opinion and his grounds and his reasons for it, withal requiring of him what course of physic is best to be prescribed. This is the only way for a young physician to attain a habit of knowing diseases when he seeth them, and a confident method of curing those that may repair to him, without running the hazard of being censured by apothecaries or derided by them for his bills, as too many are, that at Oxford or Cambridge have only imbibed a part of Senwert's institutions, and overlooked Reverius's practice, and thence attaining an imperfect and unhappy skill, by enlarging the churchyards in the city or country. But what is more, he shall escape the danger a young student pg 42 I formerly knew at Oxford precipitated himself into, by imagining every disease he read was his own. I must likewise advise our student to take his lodgings there at an able apothecary's house, to contract the knowledge of drugs, and of preparing, dispensing, and mixing them in compositions, and then by means of his own qualifications, may boldly pretend to inform, correct, and improve those apothecaries which the chance of his practice shall conduct him to. For it would be judged ridiculous should a physician undertake to reprehend, and afterwards bend his force to suppress and decry apothecaries privately or publicly, without having first acquired a particular experience in their art. Hence it is again, the vulgar physician is wrapped up in a cloud, and the pg 43 apothecaries dance round about him. He prescribes medicines he never saw, they prepare them according to their own will and pleasure. Neither is it over these alone the physician claims a superintendence, but over chirurgeons likewise, and therefore in this his course of study would contribute to his future qualifications, in sojourning a year with some experienced manual operator, without a hindrance to his other affair, and there, by an ocular inspection and handling of his instruments, demanding their names, uses, and manner of using, withal by insinuations to visit the chirurgical patients and see him dress them, would render his study in chirurgery so plain and easy, which otherwise might be thought difficult, that it should enable him pg 44 to give laws to chirurgeons also, especially to those that execute their office with that rashness, indiscretion, and dishonesty, as I have sometime discovered amongst them. These 2 years giving occasion to our student to acquire a system or a brief comprehension of the theory of physic and of the practice likewise, nothing now remains than to amplify his comment knowledge and experience by his farther travels, to which end takes his journey to Paris, to be acquainted with the most famous physicians, and to be informed of their way of practice, by surveying their prescripts at the most frequented apothecaries, to visit for a year every day the hospitals of El Hosteldia and La Charite, in which latter it is customary for any 3 or 4 PG-45 young physicians to examine and overlook the new entered patients, to name the distempers among themselves and propose their cures, for to compare their opinions afterwards with the physicians that are appointed for the hospital, and where he may see most difficult operations performed in chirurgery, as tripining, amputating, cutting for the stone, tapping of the belly and breast with the greatest dexterity. Here he may also observe wounds and ulcers cured by virtue of those famed waters, viz., the white water and the yellow water, the former being aqua calcis, the latter the same, with an addition of sublimate. The art of preparing medicines chemically, having merited a great esteem for its stupendous and admirable effects in the most PG-46 despaired diseases, shows a necessity of being instructed in it, in which he cannot fail of prying into in the course of his travels. Having attained his scope in this place, his curiosity ought to direct him to Montpellier, where he will meet with a concourse of the greatest proficients in physic in Europe, converse with the professors and physicians of that place, and out of them all extract choice observations, secrets, and most subtle opinions upon several diseases, which design can scarce be compassed in less than another year. Now we must suppose our student to merit the title of an experienced physician, and raised far above the vulgar ones that never felt the cold beyond the chimneys of their own homes. He is now rendered capable of understanding the greatest mysteries, PG-47, and most acute opinions in physic, which he is chiefly to expect from those reputed professors of the Albo at Padua, where he is likewise to continue his diligence in visiting the famed hospital of San Lorenzo, and observe the Italian method of curing diseases by alterative broths, without purging or bleeding, that climate seldom suffering plethores in those dry bodies. He cannot but be wonderfully pleased with the variety and excellent order of the plants of their physic garden, by them called horto di semplici. Neither will he receive less satisfaction from the curious and most dexterous dissections performed by the artificial hand of the anatomy professor. Having here made his abode for 6 months, may justly aspire to a degree of a doctor in physic, which the fame of the PG-48 place should persuade him to take here, being the imperial university for physic of all others in the world, and where physicians do pass a very exact scrutiny and severe test. Hence may he transport himself to Balon, and in 3 months' time add to his improvements what is possible by the advantage of the hospital and the professors. Last of all, in the imitation of the diligent bee sucking honey out of all sweet flowers, our doctor must not neglect to extract something that his knowledge did not partake of before. Out of the eminentest practitioners at Rome, examine the chief apothecaries' files, and still frequent those 3 renowned hospitals of San Spirito in the Vatican, San Giovanni Laterano on the Mount Celio, and that of San Giacomo di Augusta in the valley PG-49 Marcia, besides many others of less note. Here may he see the rarities and antiquities of this once renowned empress of the world, from whence he may visit the renowned city of Naples, and take a survey of the antiquities of the nature of Pazzali. Having thus in all particulars satisfied his curiosity, may consult about the most advantageous ways homeward, which is to embark for Leghorn or Genoa, where he cannot fail of English shipping. Or else may take a tour by land to Milan, where he will see the finest hospital and the strongest citadel in Europe. Hence passes the Alps and that stupendous Mount St. Gothard through Altdorf and Lucerne, and thence to Basel, the chief of the Protestant cantons, so by boat down the river Rhine to Strasbourg, and PG-50 Heidelberg, Mannheim, and so down the Rhine to Koblenz, Otternach, and Karlen, then by land to Brussels, Ghent, Ostend, Newport, and Dunkirk, Gravelines, and Calais, and thence to the place of his inclinations for his future settlement, where by his vast experience and knowledge, being rendered conspicuous in the secure and certain method of his cures, will soon give occasion to the people to discern the difference between him and the ordinary vulgar physicians, who by their sordid deports and dangerous practice make it their business to ease the blind people of the weight in their pockets, and plague them in worse diseases. How very few go through this course of improvement, we too readily discover, and may be reproved by the first beginning of the practice among the ancients, PG-51, where we find the method then in use, to train up youth to the profession, was to place them apprentices with able physicians, who adjudged it necessary to take their beginning from surgery, the subject whereof being external diseases, as wounds, swellings, members out of joint, and others that were visible, proved more facile and easy to their inmate capacities, and wherein they might suddenly become serviceable to their masters, in easing them of the trouble of dressing and cleansing stinking ulcers, and applying ointments and plaisters, a nauseous employ, which they ever endeavored to abandon to their scholars with what expedition possible. This as it was the easiest, so it was the first and ancientest part of physic, and from which those that exercised it were pg 52 anciently not called surgeons, but physicians, though they attempted no other diseases but what were external, according to which sense Scapegoat, the first physician or inventor of physic, and his sons Podalirius and Machion, are by history asserted to have undertaken only those that wanted external help, internal diseases being in those days unknown, and by temperance in their diet wholly debarred. And if accidentally an internal distemper did surprise them, they applied a general remedy, having no other, of poisoning or killing themselves with a dagger or sword, thereby choosing rather to die once, and finish their misery, than to survive the objects of people's pity, or to endure the shocks of death by every pain or languor, especially since the sage judgment of that age did esteem pg 53 it a signal virtue to despise and scorn the vain world, by hurrying out of it in a fury, a maxim most of the philosophers were very eminent in observing, and was likewise extended to children that brought any diseases external or internal with them into the world, their cure being performed immediately by strangling or drowning them. Neither was this art of external physic of short continuance. Pliny, writing that 600 years after the building of Rome, the Romans entertained chirurgical physicians from Peloponnesus. Idleness and gluttony at last exchanged their ease into a disease, which soon put them into a necessity of experimenting such remedies as might re-establish them into that healthful condition, which exercise in war, and temperance in diet, had for so pg 54 many ages preserved their ancestors in. Upon a competent improvement of their scholars in this external practice of physic, and their deserving deportment, they thought them worthy of giving them entrance into their closets, to be instructed in such matters as the most retired places of their cabinets contained, which were their remedies and medicines, and the manner of preparing them, and then bending his endeavors to arrive to the art of discerning the disease by its signs, and making observations upon the prognostics, all critical and preternatural changes, the dose, constitution, and all other circumstances, of giving the medicines which he did gradually accomplish, by his sedulous attendance on his master, and his practical pg 55 discourses and lectures from him on every patient he visited. Lastly, upon his attainment to a degree of perfection in the art, discovered by his master by his private examination, all the physicians and commonalty of the place were summoned to be present at the taking of his oath in the public physic school, which served in lieu of making free to practice or taking his degree, the form of which, as remarkable as it is ancient, the oath was as followeth. I swear by one Apollo the physician, and two Scapegoats, and by three Hygia, and three Panacea, and I do call to witness all the gods, and likewise all the pg 56 goddesses, that according to my power and judgment I will entirely keep this oath and this covenant, that I will esteem this master that taught me this art, give him his diet, and with a thankful spirit impart to him whatever he wants, and those that are born of him I will esteem them as my male brethren, and teach them this art, if they will learn it without hire or agreement. I will make partakers of the teaching, hearing, and of all the whole discipline, my own and my master's sons, and the rest of the disciples, if they were bound before by writing, and were obliged by the physician's oath, no other besides. I will, according to my capacity and judgment, prescribe a manner of diet suitable to the sick, free from all pg 57 hurt or injury. Neither will I, through any body's intercession, offer poison to any, neither will I give counsel to any such thing, neither will I give a woman a pessary to destroy her conception. Moreover, I will exercise my art, and lead the rest of my life chastely and holily. Neither will I cut those that are troubled with the stone, but give them over to artists that profess this art. And whatever houses I shall come into, I will enter for the benefit of the sick, and I will abstain from doing any voluntary injury, from all corruption, and chiefly from that which is venereal, whether I should happen to have in cure the bodies either of women or of men, or of freeborn men or servants, and whatever I shall chance to see or hear in PG 58 curring, or to know in the common life of men, if it be better not to utter it, I will conceal and keep by me. As secrets, that is, I entirely keep and do not confound this oath, it may happen to me to enjoy my life and my art happily, and celebrate my glory among all men to all perpetuity. But if transgressing and forswearing, that the contrary may happen. Between those bounds of secrecy, veneration, honesty, and gratitude, the art was for many hundred years maintained. For in the time of Galen, and many ages after him, medicines for their greater secrecy were used to be prepared and composed by physicians, as you may read liber, divert, centaur. Whereas observable, their men were wont to carry PG 59 their physic ready prepared in boxes after them, which they themselves, according to the exigency, did dispense. This custom was continued until wars ceasing, people began to be as intent upon the propagation of mankind, as the cruelty of the former martial ages had been upon its destruction, where the world growing numerous, and through idleness and want of those diversions of their military employ, addicting themselves to gluttony, drunkenness, and whoredom, did contract so great a number of all inward diseases, that their multiplicity imposed a necessity upon physicians, being unable to attend them all as formerly, to dismember their act into 3 parts, whereof 2 were servile, chirurgery, and pharmacy, and the other imperial and applicative or methodical. PG 60, the servile part being now committed to such as are now called surgeons and apothecaries. The former were employed in applying external medicines to external diseases, the latter in preparing all ordinary internal and external medicines, according to the prescription and directions of the physicians, whose servants were ordered to fetch the prescribed medicines at the apothecaries, and thence to convey them to their patients, by which means the apothecary was kept in ignorance, as to the application and use of the said medicines, not being suffered to be acquainted with the patients or their diseases, to prevent their insinuation into their acquaintance, which otherwise might endanger the diverting the said patients to other physicians, or at least their presuming PG 61 themselves to venture at their distempers. Neither were the physicians' servants in the least probability of undermining or imitating their masters in the practice, not knowing their medicines or prescriptions. Besides all this, those remedies from which the chief efficacy and operation against the disease was expected still remained secret with the physicians, who thought it no trouble to prepare them with their own hands. Thus you may remark the physicians' necessary jealousy of their underlings, and their small pains proved the sole means of impropriating their art to themselves, and yet by the advantage of their chirurgeons and apothecaries were capacitated to visit and cure 10 times greater numbers of sick than before, which in a short time improved their fame and PG 62 estate to a vast treasure, whence it was well rhymed. Dat Galenus opes, dat Justinianus honors. But at length their honor and vast riches in the eye of apothecaries and surgeons proved seeds sown in their minds that budded into ambition of becoming masters and into covetousness of equality and sharing with them in their wealth, both which they thought themselves capable of aspiring to by an empirical skill. The neglect and sloth of their masters had given them occasion to attain, since they did not begin to scruple to make them porters of their medicines to their patients, to entrust them with the preparation of their greatest secrets. This trust they soon betrayed, PG 63, for having insinuated into a familiar acquaintance with their master's patients. It was a task not difficult to persuade them, that those that had made and dispensed the medicines were as able to apply them to the like distempers, as they that had prescribed them, who had either forgot or were wholly ignorant how to prepare them, so that now they were as good as arrived to a co-partnership with their masters in reputation and title, the best being called doctors alike, and there being no other difference between them than that the master doctor comes at the heels of his man doctor, to take in hand the work which he or his brother doctor, the chirurgeon, had either spoiled or could not farther go on with. A very fine case, the art of physic and its professors are reduced to, and that not PG 64 only of late days, but of almost 700 years. For before that time apothecaries had scarce a being. Only there were those they called seplacerage from their selling of ointments on the market of Capua, called seplasia, armitarage, and specierage, or such as sold drugs and spices. Though, I confess, apothecaries may offer a just objection in pretending to a far greater antiquity, since the original and necessity of their employ was derived from the Egyptian bird Isis spouting water into its breech for a glister. But 'tis no matter, the doctor must truckle to this powerful engineer, he must conform to the manner of the age. And were I to enumerate the many abuses that are practiced by this lower profession, I mean the generality of them, you would be more careful in making choice of your PG-65 apothecary, or making a better choice in having least to do with them. And how dangerous is their ignorance in the Latin tongue, which is of very ill consequence, as their prescriptions sent by the physicians are writ in Latin, and which not being rightly understood, hath often occasioned not only innocent but fatal mistakes. Homine semi docto quid iniquius, and that a great part of the apothecaries are very illiterate, is so evident that they themselves dare not deny it. Among many instances of this kind, that most unfortunate one recorded by an eminent physician is notorious, who instead of a dose of mercurius sublimatus dulcis, exhibited so much common sublimate, a mortal poison, which was scarce ever given inwardly, instead of an innocent medicine approved by all PG-66 physicians. Yet those worthy sons of bombast must disgust your palate with the relation of the nauseous and choking terms, their ends of Latin and stifling phrases, driving to confound and amaze the simple vulgar. An instance of this kind may afford you some little diversion. A practical apothecary coming to see his customer, a cobbler that lay indisposed of the colic, observed him to crack a fart, for so it is expressed in the original, upon which, said the apothecary, "Sir, that's nothing but the tonitruation of flatuosities in your intestines." This was no sooner out of his mouth, but the cobbler cracked another, and replied to his doctor, "Sir, that is nothing but your hobgoblin notes thundering wind out of my guts," which literal return of his terms of art in plain PG-67 English, though by chance, obliged the apothecary to this expression: "I beg your pardon, sir, I suppose you have studied the art of physic as well as myself, and want not my help." So away went Dr. Pestle, imagining the cobbler to be as great a master in the faculty as himself. Another complaint against the apothecaries is that they are not well acquainted with the materia medica, the knowledge of which is an essential part of their profession, but must take the words of druggists, who themselves are sometimes mistaken and differ about the names of several drugs, and which is worse, their trusting to herb women, who obtrude almost anything upon the greatest part of them, and that those women do often mistake one thing for another, sometimes ignorantly, PG-68 sometimes designedly, is well known to many physicians, who have seen them sell the apothecaries' herbs, roots, and seeds, under other names than those they do really bear, for many among them cannot distinguish between ingredients noxious and salutary, so that we have not patients daily poisoned, is rather from the care of herb women than apothecaries. Another just cause of complaint against the apothecaries are their old medicines, for suppose them as faithfully prepared as they can pretend or we desire, yet length of time will make some changes in them, which are not often improvements. The syrups grow acid, and waters full of mother, electuaries and pills dry and deprived of their most active parts. Powders themselves are not free from this fate, whose virtues in PG-69 time we find marvelously diminished. But were they to be told of this, you may with as good success preach to a wall, for not a dram of any other medicine will the apothecaries part with but for sale, so that many times they sell their preparations 5 or 6 years after they were made, and whether their medicinal properties are not much impaired, if they have any left, we leave to others to determine. And indeed the apothecary has many things in his shop which are not called for in many months, yet these must be vended with the rest, all which, when they have lost their virtues, should they be rejected, it would be much to their prejudice, and they have a fundamental practice that no such thing should be allowed of. For 'tis much better the patient should suffer PG-70 somewhat in his body than the apothecary in his estate. And if he is injured by his bad physic, perhaps he will take pity of him, and the next prescription shall be better prepared, whereby he makes him abundance of recompense for the hurt he received by that which was bad, and he himself makes an advantage of both, although perhaps if he had consulted the patient, he would rather have chosen to keep his head sound than have it broken, that a proper plaister might be applied for the cure. This is so notorious a truth, that all the world, even their best friends, exclaim against them for it. And till they amend this among many other peccadilloes, it behoves the patient to take care how seldom he employs them. Another, that the apothecaries and their servants are so pg-71 careless, slovenly and slight in preparing of dispensatory or prescribed medicines, that neither the physicians or the diseased have reason to repose that trust in them which they challenged as their due. As for slovenliness, they may, I confess, plead the old proverb, that what the eyes see not, the heart rues not. Indeed, of all the rest it may be dispensed with, but should patients but once behold how their physic was prepared in some shops, they would nauseate it. But lest I should offend some nice stomachs, I shall dismiss this subject and proceed to another, which is the carelessness of apothecaries and their apprentices, on which I can never reflect without fear and indignation, to think what numbers have been destroyed and injured by such proceedings. That this is pg-72, not a groundless apprehension, many families can witness, and you can converse with few persons who are not able to give an account of some such miscarriages. Another thing of great blame with the apothecaries is their enhancing the prices of medicines so much above what they might in reason expect, about which the physician must no ways concern himself, because it has a bad influence on him, as on the account of his patient, though certainly, if the apothecaries were more modest in the pricing of their physic, the patient would be more liberal to the physician, whereas, on the contrary, the apothecary holds them at such unreasonable rates that in most courses of physic he gains more than the doctor, how deservedly let others determine, though in my opinion, pg-73 were their pay proportioned to their care and honesty, I doubt they would gain little besides shame and reproaches, but their bills must be paid without abatement, and with how much regret they are discharged, I shall refer it to those who have suffered by them. Now several things contribute to, or are the occasional causes of this universal grievance. The physician's silence, and the number, pride, or covetousness of the apothecaries, and that prices are not set upon their medicines. The apothecaries being reduced into a company were at first few, and therefore having full employment, could afford their medicines at moderate prices. But being since that time increased to a great number, each person bringing up 2 or 3 or more, that employment, which was pg-74 before in a few hands, became more dispersed, so that very small portion thereof falls to the share of some, and indeed very few of them have more than they can manage. Now the sick must maintain all these, for although there be no occasion for a sixth part, yet they must all live handsomely, to supply which expense they have no other way than to exalt the prices of their medicines, and still the less they are employed, the higher they must prize them, otherwise they could not possibly subsist, unless they became physicians and prescribe as well as prepare, to which practices they are not only propense, but more arrogantly assume, which is no less fatal to their patients than by the impudent prescription of your common quacksalver, empiric, or mountebank. pg-75 now, would it not be much better if it were with us, as in some parts of Europe, where the magistrates of many cities agree upon a certain number of apothecaries, so many as they can apprehend are necessary, all the rest are excluded and must either seek other seats, or be content for a small salary to work under those that are allowed, their apothecaries not being permitted to multiply by apprentices, but one out of the shop is by the public authority appointed to succeed in the employment. Hamburg has but one, Stockholm and Copenhagen 4 or 5, Paris, which rivals London in its inhabitants, has but 1 or 2 and 50. They are from the due regard to the safety of the people exempted from offices, either troublesome or profitable, that they may always be inspecting pg-76 the preparations or compounding of the doses to prevent the deadly consequences of sophisticated medicines or the fatal errors of one composition for another, not easily to be distinguished. They are not permitted to visit the sick, that they may not be wanting from the duties of the shop, or be tempted to gratify themselves as they please for the trouble, by introducing the custom of taking too often of the bolus and cordials. The physician's fees are settled according to the various conditions and abilities of the patient. Teas not allowed them to make any advantage by the arbitrary rates of physic, when prepared by themselves, that the patient and the bill may not be too much inflamed by a profit on that side, not easily to be limited or confined. I would PG-77 not be suspected to design any prejudice to the careful and industrious apothecary. If such there be, his business requires the greatest diligence and fidelity in selecting the drugs, and preparing them faithfully according to the appointment of the faculty, and in making up the doses with that just regard to the life of the sick, that all suspicion of the least mistake may be prevented in the weight and measure or the number of drops and 100. But when the apothecary deserts his station, is always abroad, and leaves the compounding part to his unexperienced apprentice, who cannot avoid sometimes infusing one thing for another, by which errors many are known to have lost their lives. When 'tis known that the prescripts are made up of medicines bought by wholesale of PG-78 the chemist, and not made up by the apothecary himself, as is too much the present practice, and consequently can't be known to be made of all, and best ingredients, but are suspected because bought at low prices, you will doubt whether the character of an apothecary can be given to this new, until lately unknown employment, when he neglects the business of his trade, neither prepares himself the compositions, nor forms the doses for them, to be delivered at the most urgent occasions, but daringly undertakes to advise in all distempers, he becomes an empiric, and invades a profession which he cannot be supposed to understand. And here give me leave to be serious, in examining their general practice in all diseases. Suppose yourself to be troubled with any PG-79 distemper, it matters not which, for all is one to him you send to. Upon his arrival he feels your pulse, and with a fixed eye upon your countenance tells you your spirits are low, and therefore it's high time for a cordial. The next interrogatory he puts gravely to you is, "When was you at stool, sir?" If not today, he promises to send you a laxative clister by and by, and if you complain you have a looseness, then instead of one laxative, he will send you 2 healing clisters. If besides you intimate a pain in your stomach, back and sides, then, responding to each pain, you shall have a stomach plaister, another for the right side, another for the left, and one for the back, and so you are like to have a large patch and well fortified round the middle. Now, before we go farther, let's PG-80 compute the charge of the first day. There is the cordial, composed by the direction of some old dusty bill on his file, out of 2 or 3 musty waters, especially if it be towards the latter end of the year, and that his glasses have been stopped with corks, viz. It may be a citron, a borage, and a balm water, all very full of spirits, if river water may be so accounted. To these is to be added 1 ounce of that miraculous treacle water, then to be dissolved a dram of confectio alcums, and 1 ounce of nauseous syrup of July flowers. This being well shaked in the vial, you shall spy a great quantity of gold swimming in leaves up and down, for which your conscience would be burthened should you give him less than 5 shillings. For from the meanest tradesman he PG-81 expects, without abatement, 3 and 6 pence, the ordinary and general price of all cordials, though consisting only of balm water and half an ounce of syrup of July flowers. Your clister shall be prepared out of 2 or 3 handsful of mallow leaves and 1 ounce of common fennel seeds, boiled in water to a pint, which strained, shall be thickened with the common electuary lenitive, rape oil and brown sugar, and so seasoned with salt. This shall be conveyed into your guts by the young doctor, his man, through an engine he commonly carries about with him and makes him smell so wholesome. For which piece of service, if you present your engineer with less than half a crown, he will think himself worse dealt with than those who empty your necessary closets in the night. PG-82, the master places to account for the gut medicine, though it were no more than water and salt, and for the use of his man, which he calls porterage, 8 groats, item, for a stomatic, hepatic, splenetic, and a nephritic plaister, for each half a crown. What the total of this day's physic does amount to you may reckon. The next afternoon or evening the apothecary returns himself to give you a visit, for should he appear in the morning, it would argue he had little to do, and finding, upon examination, you are rather worse than better, by reason those plaisters caused a melting of the gross humours about the bowels and dissolved them into winds and vapours, which fuming to the head, occasion a great headache, dullness, and drowsiness, and part of MPG-83 being dispersed through the guts and belly, discompose you with a colic, a swelling of your belly, and an universal pain or lassitude over all your limbs. Thus you see one day makes work for another, However, he hath the wit to assure you they are signs of the operations of yesterday's means, beginning to move and dissolve the humours, which successful work is to be promoted by a cordial aposum, the repetition of a carminative clister, another cordial to take by spoonfuls, and because your sleep has been interrupted by the unquietness of swelling humours, he will endeavour to procure you for this next night. Truce with your disease by an hypnotic potion that shall occasion rest. Neither will he give you any other cause than to imagine him a most careful PG-84 man, and so circumspect that scarce a symptom shall pass his particular regard, and therefore to remove your headache by retracting the humours, or rather, as you are like to discern best, by attracting humours and vapours, he will order his young Mercury to apply a vesicatory to the nape of your neck, and with warm hand to besmear your belly and all your joints with a good comfortable ointment for to appease your pains. The cordial aposum is a decoction that shall derive its virtue from 2 or 3 unsavoury roots, and as many herbs and seeds, with a little syrup of July flowers, for 3 or 4 times taking, which because you shall not undervalue by having it brought to you all in one glass, you shall have it sent you in so many vials and draughts, and PG-85 for. Every one of them shall be placed 3 shillings to your own account, which is 5 parts more than the whole stands him in, for the cordial potion as much, for the hypnotic potion the same price, for your carminative clister no less, and for the epispostic plaister a shilling. Thus, with the increase of your disease, you may perceive the increase of your bill, and therefore it's no improper observation that the apothecaries practice follow the course of the moon. The 3rd day produces an addition of new symptoms and an augmentation of the old ones. The patient stands in need of new comfort from his apothecary, who tells him that nature begins now to work more strong, and therefore all things go well and never ill. But because nature requires all possible PG-86 assistance from cordials and small evacuations, he must expect to have the same cordials over again, but with the addition of greater ingredients, it may be magistery of pearl or oriental bezoar in powder, besides the repetition of a clister, and the renewing of your plaisters. For the profit of your physician, you must be persuaded to accept of a comfortable electuary for the stomach to promote digestion, of a colution to wash your gums to secure you from the scurvy, serving at the same time to wash the slime and filth from your tongue, of a melilot plaister to apply to the blister that was drawn the night fore, of some spirits of salt to drop into your beer at meals, of 3 pills of roughy to be swallowed down that night, and 3 next morning, which possibly may PG-87 pleasure you with 3 stools, but are to be computed at 2 doses, each at a shilling, the spirit of salt a crown the ounce, for the stomach electuary as much, for the clisters as before, for your cordial in relation to the pearl and bezoar, their weight in gold, which is 2 pence a grain, the greatest cheat of my whole discourse, for dressing your blister a shilling, for the plaister as formerly. Here I presume that candour in you, as not to believe me so disingenuous, as to take the advantage of apothecaries in producing any other than the best methods of their practice, and that which favours the least of their frauds, for in comparison with others, though these are very palpable, in regard there is not a valuable consideration regarded as a quid pro quo. They are such as may be judged PG-88 passable. Yet when you are to reflect upon the total that shall arise on the arithmetical progression of charge of a fortnight's physic, modestly computed at about 15 shillings a day, without the inclusion of what you please to present him for his care, trouble, and attendance, I will not harbour so ill an opinion of him, or give so rigid a censure as yourself shall upon the following oration your clisterpipe doctor delivers to you with a melancholy accent, in these terms: Sir, I have made use of my best skill and endeavours. I have been an apothecary these 20 years, and upwards, and have seen the best practice of our best London physicians. My master was such one one of the ablest apothecaries of the city. I have given you the best cordials that PG-89 can be prescribed. 'Tis at your instance I did it. I can do no more, and indeed it is more properly the work of a physician. Your case is dangerous, and I think, if you sent for such a one, doctor, he is a very pretty man. If you please, I will get him to come down. Now, sir, how beats your pulse? The loss of your moneys your bills import, give addition to your pain, through the remembrance it is due to one that hath fooled you out of it, and deserved it no other way, than by adding wings to your gross humours that before lay dormant, and now fly rampant up and down, raking and raging, which had you not been penny wise and pound foolish, you would have prevented by sending for a physician, who for the small merit of a city fee, for which you might also have PG-90 expected 2 visits, would have struck at the root of the distemper, without tampering at its symptoms or branches, and by virtue of one medicine, restored you to your former condition of health, from which you are now so remote, being necessitated, considering your doubtful state, to be at the charge of a physician or 2, to whom, upon examination of what hath been done before, the apothecary shall humbly declare, he hath given you nothing but cordials, which word cordial he supposes to be a sufficient protection for his erroneous practice. And I must tell you that had his cordial method been continued in a fever or any other acute distemper for 8 or 10 days, your heirs would have been particularly obliged to him for giving you a cordial remove PG-91 out of your possession, and that through omission of those 2 great remedies, purging and bleeding, the exact use whereof, in respect of time and quantity and other circumstances, can only be determined by accomplished physicians. I cannot better describe their unaptness for so great a work, nor express the great difficulties that must be conquered to deserve the first character of a complete physician, than in the words of that eminent and learned physician, Dr. Fuller. It requires, says he, to understand the learned languages, natural philosophy, all the parts of the body, and the animal economy, the nature, causes, times, tendencies, symptoms, diagnostics, and prognostics of diseases, the indications of cure and contra PG. 92 indications, the rules of errors of living as to the 6 non-naturals. We must have the skill to judge to whom, for what, when, how much, how often to prescribe bleeding, vomiting, purging, sweating, and other evacuations, as also to opiates, chalybeates, cortex, and the numberless other alteratives. We must be very well acquainted with the virtues, faults, preparations, compositions, and doses of vegetables, animals, minerals, and all shop medicines. And lastly, to complete all, must be able, upon every emergent occasion, to write a bill for a patient readily, pertinently, and in form according to art. Now to accomplish all this, a man had need be rightly born, and set out by nature, with a peculiar genius, and PG-93 particular fitness, and with a strong prevailing inclination to this study and practice above all others. He must endeavor with diligence, sagacity and gravity, integrity, and such a convenient briskness and courage as will bear him up, and carry him through difficulties, without presumptuous rashness or barbarous hard-heartedness. And then, 'tis necessary he should be a man of a competent estate, to answer the great expense of education and expectation, for he must be brought up directly in it from the beginning of his studies in the university. He must lay out all his time and talents upon reading, advising, observing, experimenting, reasoning, remembering, with an unwearied labor of body and application of mind. PG-94 he must run through courses of anatomy, botany, chemistry, and Galenic pharmacy, and when he hath done all this, cannot handsomely complete himself, except he see good variety of others' practice, which by the by it's probable he will have more time for than he could wish, before he can get any of his own. Now each of those singly will require a great deal of pains, expense, and time to be attained, and yet all these and much more that can be in short summed up, ought to be done, and in some measure accomplished, before a man can be rightly and duly qualified even to begin practice. And as to matter of fact, few, very few, God knows, there have been or now are who, though they spared not for education or diligence, ever worked themselves up PG-95 to a tolerable sufficiency. Nay, Hippocrates himself, that great genius, is not ashamed to confess in an epistle to Democritus that though he was now got to old age and to the end of life, yet he was not got to the end of physic. No, nor was Scapegoat neither, the inventor of it. By all which it's undeniably evident that the science and practice of physic is one of the largest studies and most difficult undertakings in the world, and consequently not any the best collection of prescripts that ever was, will, or can be writ or printed, can alone make a complete physician, any more than good colors and pencils alone can make a fine painter. And yet every illiterate fellow and paltry gossip that can make shift to patch up a parcel of pitiful PG-96 receipts have the impudence and villainy to venture at it, and in hopes of a good pig, goose, or basket of chickens, shall boldly stake their skill, forsooth, against men's lives, and lose them, and at the same time scandalize and keep out true physicians that might probably save them. And this leads me to the third consideration, the great danger and damage occasioned by the rash tampering of such as are not educated rightly and qualified for it. You that enter not by the door into the profession, but climb up some other way, ought to take it into your most serious thoughts, that mistakes and mismanagement in so difficult a business easily happen. Often the mischiefs occasioned thereby are impossible to be retrieved, and being upon the PG-97 body, perhaps mind of man, sometimes produce such undoing misery, such deplorable ruin, as would make even an heart of stone break and bleed, and death to think of it. Suppose one should lose his limbs or health, and live unhappily in pain, sick or bedrid all his days through your improper applications or ignorant omissions. Would it not turn your very bowels within you, and make you wish 1,000 times you had never been that unadvised busybody to act thus foolishly and unfortunately? But put the case again. You behold a dead man, which to me is the most lamentable of all lamentable spectacles upon earth. I say, put case, a poor dead man were laid before your eyes, that your heart tells you might probably have lived many a fair year, PG 98, had it not been for your physicking of him. Such a sight, such a thought, if you have the least humanity left, cannot fail to pierce your very soul, and ever after the remembrance, yea, the evil conscience of it must haunt you and give you horror and terror, and a sort of hell to your dying hour. Perhaps it may be an only and hopeful son, in whose life his aged parents' lives were bound up, and they die too, or linger out a miserable life in sorrow and anguish worse than death. Perhaps the good father of a many little orphans, who being poor and now helpless, must piteously perish, or being fallen into bad hands, and cheated of what was left them, may suffer poverty, contempt, injury, and misery all their life long. PG 99, perhaps a wife, who might have brought forth an useful eminent man, a hero of his generation, and the head of splendid families. And so, the mischief you do may fall upon not only the present, but future ages. But possibilities and putting of cases are endless. The upshot of all this, if you take upon you to cure the sick, and be not licensed and otherwise qualified for it, if you presumptuously thrust in yourself, and bar out another that is authorized and able, though no ill event chanced thereupon, yet well it might, and was likely to do so for all you, and therefore good providence that protected your patient and fenced off the evils, is alone to be thanked, and you nevertheless to be blamed. But if death ensue, your arrogant intermeddling and pernicious PG 100 quackery, be assured of it, 'tis a sort of murder in the court of conscience, and probably will be adjudged so in the last great court. This is not my private opinion only, but the judgment and decision of the legislature of our land. For the present state of England tells us that by the law of England, if one who is no physician or surgeon and not expressly allowed to practice shall take upon him a cure, and his patient die under his hands, this is felony in the person presuming so to do. 'Tis not enough for you to say, if I can do no good, I'll do no hurt, which you may as well invert, and say, if I do no hurt, I'll do no good. No, you interlope, you injure the faculty, you discourage education, you keep PG 101 out better advice, you trifle with men's lives, you lose the golden opportunity, you prolong the case, till it gets head, and grows incurable and mortal, or else extremely hazardous and almost helpless, and this is doing hurt with a vengeance. To bring this home to you, and make it more plain, if an house be on fire, and you come and pretend to put it out yourself, and absolutely keep off others, and then fling in dust instead of water, and so the flame gets mastery. In this case, though you did not directly intend any positive hurt, though you did not actually pour in oil, nor stir and blow up the coals, yet forasmuch as you would needs be an undertaker, and could not extinguish it yourself, and suffered not others, used to and skilled in the business, who PG 102 coming with water and proper engines, might have done it, you are really and truly the cause of it being burnt. Think not to excuse yourself by pretending you did it out of charity, and meant well, though it fell out ill. No, no, be it known to you, such a charity as did not appertain to you, and proved murderous, was unpardonable presumption, and therefore will not cover the multitude of sins. If you are not sufficient for those things, you'll do well and wisely to desist from this difficult and dangerous practice, and fall into such a trade of life as you well understand and rightly can manage, and then like the men who used curious arts, Acts 19. You may burn all your receipt books, so shall you keep your innocence, save your conscience, PG 103 secure your quiet, and yet reserve room enough to exercise your charity. For if at any time your heart move you to pity and succor a poor sick neighbor that can't pay for advice, there will be no necessity that you should try your skill upon him, till you mischief or murder him by way of charity. Do but you send him a physician, medicines and necessaries without hope of requital, and trust me, that will be an handsome assistance, most nobly becoming a generous mind and a charitable man. Now that not one of our apothecaries, or indeed very few of our modern traders in physic, have these requisite endowments, I shall leave it to any considerate person to judge of, and how far they stretch beyond their PG 104 knowledge. We have a many miserable objects in our daily view, woeful instances of their great rashness, folly, and ignorance. That the profession has sunk into the craft of deceiving and amusing and making profit by new medicines or useless preparations brought into fashion and highly esteemed, as long as the mode of crying them up shall last, and the fallacy which imposes them can support it, the unhappy people suffer themselves to be deluded and cheated of their lives and their money. The rich please themselves that they can purchase the alexipharmac, which has power to control the disease, and have not any doubt within themselves that by the often use their lives become almost immortal. They look down with some small pity on the PG 105 vulgar, who they think must die before them, being not able to pay the ransom. They please themselves, because health and life are of the highest demands for these rarities peculiar to them. The gentlemen of both the higher and lower faculty have not been wanting to make use of the credulity and weakness of the richer patients, and I shall now lay open to your great surprise that the most despicable and useless stuff have been brought into the highest esteem to be relied on in the most difficult and dangerous distempers. And first, of the bezoar stone, an obvious instance of our English practice, from whence you may concur with the physicians abroad, with what skill and art and integrity the profession continues to be practiced here. PG 106 bezoar, which has neither smell nor taste, and upon taking into the stomach gives no sensation perceivable, has held its name and reputation almost sacred with us, though exploded long since in almost all parts of Europe. The French are well convinced that they have been imposed upon by the trading physicians returning from the Indies to take off the pretty trifle at a very great price. They had made it to be admired by asserting that it was able to encounter poisons, that no malignant distempers were able to resist its sovereign virtues. But their overdoing spoilt their market. The more curious and wiser part of the nation discerning the abuse had the opportunity of promoting the experiment, which they procured by the king's command, 2 criminals who had poisoned PG 107 given them, with promise of life, if bezoar could procure their pardon. They lost their lives, and the physicians and the stone their reputations. The greatest and most learned abroad have freely owned that they have been deceived by it, but their patients much more, who had used it without success and any observable effect. Dr. Pauly tells you he has left the use of it many years and had given to better purpose, the more powerful and certain cordials taken from plants, and supports his opinion with the suffrages of Casper, Bauhinus, Casp, Hoffmanus, Rectius, Fabricius. The learned and judicious Demobrec in his treatise of the pestilence declares he had no regard to it, that he gave it often obsc ullo fructu, movebat aliquo modo exiguum duntixit PG 108 sudorum. It did, says he, no good to those who used it, scarcely moved so much as a little sweat. It was of the best parcel chosen of any coming from the Indies, or ever was sent to Europe, but gave them not the least relief, though they had promised themselves the greatest from it. To confirm his opinion that it is worth nothing, he produces the opinion of Hercules Saxonias and Crato physician to 3 emperors, and refers you to many others. Dr. Paton, late royal professor of physic in Paris, decides the pretenses to its being of any kind of use. He says it neither stirs the blood, nor puts the spirits in any motion. Besides some of the above-named physicians, he appeals to the judgment of many others, and his own experience of more than 30 years. The lately corrected Leeuwarden's PG 109 dispensatory leaves it out of their Gascon's powder, condemning it as a useless and frivolous ingredient. Bontius tells you that if we must give stones, we ought to put a greater value upon those cut out of the bladders of man, a more noble creature, fed with meat of the highest nourishment, and his spirits warmed with wine, than that of a goat starving upon the mountains. He assures you that he has given the bezoar from the gall or the bladder with better effect than he ever observed of those from the Indies. The physicians who first began the amusement and cheat made themselves ridiculous by dreading to give for a dose more than 5 or 6 or 7 grains. You may take 40 or 50 with no other advantage or alteration than your pg 110 imagination shall raise, and with the same effect 10 times as much more. It may, with modern observers, pass for a sweater and a cordial when they have given it with good cordials and sweaters, but the most visible operation it has is seen when the bill is paid. Our physicians in their private conversations talk of it as a thing altogether worthless, but because the people are willing to be cheated with bezoar and pearl, they dare not entertain a thought of undeceiving them, fearing the consequence to their own disadvantage. And I pray, with what art can the high rate of medicines be maintained, if the world could not be amused with the imagination of being kept alive in all the distempers by the force of these two. Pg 111 pearl is a disease in a shellfish, as bezoar is in the quadruped. They are very different in shape and bulk. The whitest and most glittering are most in esteem. The sickly fancy conceits it will revive the blood as it pleases the eye, and that it will brisk up the spirits and mind when it reflects on its being dear and fashionable, but this has been despised by the honest physicians who prescribe for the cure of their patients. The famous Plater, after the experience of a many years' practice, rejects the pretended virtues of pearl or metals, which have no taste or smell, to give the least pretense to rank them with the vegetable alexipharmacs. Most of our writers are of his sentiment, and give it only a common place with the others usually prescribed in the pg 112 heart-burning or windy sour humor offending the upper orifice of the stomach. But the shell of the fish that breeds them pretends to, and is allowed by all our best authors to have the same virtues. Nature has been very liberal in this sort of alkali, all the shellfish, all the claws of crabs, or the tips, if you please to value them most, the 2 stones of the crawfish, and the shells of eggs are directed frequently with the pearl, the 2 corals, and 100. And the numerous earths of the absorbing kind, the chalk, the marls, are judged by many preferable to it, or are used with the same success, so that we have the greatest reason to believe that the debauched practice of the English preservers of health have made use of it with design to extract sums out of the purse, rather than of making pg 113 the crasses of the blood better or the spirits more vivacious. And if you have oyster shells or crab's eyes in its stead, which are generally made use of under that name, they will have the same, if not a better effect. Gold is by our chemical writers stilled the sun and the king of metals. The kings and princes of the last age were amazed and defrauded, their lives made less durable than their subjects, who were beneath the use of gold. The chicken they eat had the happiness to be fed with it, that they might extract the sulfur and prepare it by their circulation and volatilize it for their use. But the physicians were contented to collect all the gold which passed unaltered and undiminished through the poultry into their pockets. This, with many other artifices pg 114 of this stamp, are by many laid aside, because the public begin to be sensible that the gold, as the bezoar and the pearl, were of more cordial virtue to the adviser and confederates than to the subject of their care and attendance. The aurum potabile is sometime the entertainment of conversation, when the poor alchemists or their vain pretensions are considered, there being no humor in any animal which can alter or dissolve it, no effect or operation can be expected from it. It deludes the eye and fancy in the cordial waters, and on the bolus and electuaries, but must pass away sooner or later, as it adheres more or less to the stomach or bowels, without acting or being acted on. In any part of the body, the pills, either purgative or pg 115 cordial, are as often dismissed entire, having been covered with leaf gold, which is able, though thin, to dismiss the most subtle and penetrating parts of all humors. The value of the leaf is not worth your enquiry, the book being sold at a low price. The fulminating powder is a rough, violent medicine, and has been lately neglected, and given place to others more useful and less dangerous. Silver and lunar pills are as vile and disregardless as gold, when they are considered with relation to the cure of diseases. The precious stones have constantly been put into the old receipts by that sort of writers who prescribe every medicine very faithfully, and designed to please and amuse the readers with the bulk and length of the PG 116 prescription. But they have been neglected by the practical authors, who had the trouble of considering that no manner of virtue could be expected from so hard and therefore impenetrable bodies as the diamond, ruby, hyacinth, the sapphire, the smaragd and topaz and 100, who are not capable of a dissolution and of altering or acting upon the fluids, and as it is most certain that many very cheap medicines have greater and more observable effects, it's ridiculous to give a hard, gritty powder, which may for many reasons corrode and offend the stomach and bowels in their passage. Among the many foreign vegetables imported here, I must take notice of sarsaparilla, as it has had the preference before many others, especially of our own growth, in many difficult and PG 117 chronicle cases, will have obtained its credit and reputation by being in good company, and by being prescribed with the cheapest drugs, but of the greatest virtues, viz. Guiacum, sassafras, china, and the seeds of many most useful plants. If it has been by itself beneficial in the practice of the West Indies, it has lost its qualities in the passage into the colder climates. Being a soft and thin root, it may evaporate and exhale its most active parts. Many of the late writers have given this judgment of it, that it is nullius saporis vel odoris, of no smell or taste. The physicians have not yet done, but contrive to thrust into the stomachs of their patients, not only the most loathsome, but the parts of animals, which after their death are void of all PG 118 spirits or oils, and are a dry and unactive earth. The first sort, mummy claims the precedence. This has had the honor to be worn in the bosom next to the heart, by the kings and princes, and all those who could then bear the price the last age in all the courts of Europe. 'Twas presented with the greatest assurance that it was able to preserve from the most deadly infections, and that the heart was secured by it from all the kinds of malignity. They expected long life from the decayed or dead spices and balsams and gums, and the peace of the dead body of an Egyptian prince or of a slave preferred by him. If taken inwardly, it was avowed to be able to dissolve the blood coagulated, to give new life and motion to all the spirits. The dried hearts of PG 119 many animals, the livers, the spleens burnt to a powder, the skins of the stomachs or guts of cocks and worms, and the dried lungs of foxes, ought to be rejected as loathsome and offensive without any qualities to amend, by the expectation of any advantage. The powder of vipers by itself, and in the troches, will deserve a more strict examination, because it is not only depended on in many chronical diseases, but the life of the patient in the acute and pestilential is betrayed and lost, if it has no alexitherial powers to expel the malignity or support the natural vigor. But as the flesh of all animals and fish, when dried, have exhaled the volatile spirits with the moisture, and nothing remains but the skins and fibers, and are capable of PG 120 giving very little nourishment to the blood, and are very difficult to be dissolved or digested in the stomach, you may conclude, by trying when in health, if vipers will support your strength, or if eating of the flesh in all the kinds of cookery will please the palate more than the common food, what you may hope from the dry powder, or the cake of it with salt and meal. And the troches of vipers are no more, when your fever calls for the best alexipharmac. You may to this compare the skulls of dead men, now presumed to command the epilepsies and other violent diseases. If the skull has been long in powder, or has long survived the criminal, the spirits distilled from it are not stronger than those from the horn of a stag, or the spirits of urine by itself, or from sal PG 121 ammoniac. The shell of the head preserves the brains, and the powder shall not fail to preserve the spirits of all the brains which can be persuaded to use it. What can you think will be the success from the use of the nest of the swallow or the cast-off skin of a serpent? Your thoughts will naturally reflect on the perfidious forbery of making great gain from the bubbles put on the sick, or the vile negligence of the rest who have suffered the fatal amusements to be at last confirmed by custom. After these it may seem needless to speak of the gainful industry, which has brought the horns of the elk, the buffalo, rhinoceros, and of the unicorn's horn, which is no other than the bone of a fish, and has been thought sufficient alone to expel all poisons. PG 122, or the hoofs of the elk and the ounce, or the bone of the heart of a stag, the effect of his old age, or the jawbones of the pike, and 100, or the ankle bones of the hares and boars, and 100, with the eagle stone, and those for the cramp and convulsions and colics, the great assistance from your amulets and abounding nostrums cannot sufficiently be derided. Of the simple distilled waters, 150 are appointed to be made. The greatest part of them are not now prepared, and indeed they are found of no use, but to increase the bulk of the julep, with the hot and compound waters. The milk water is now ordered for that design, and because as much money can be procured from it as from all the vast variety of the other, this in PG 123, the usual practice almost supplies the place of all the rest. You may run over the vast number of the Galenical preparations and compositions, as they are improperly styled. They are almost 700, to be kept till they be corrupt, and be viewed as the old rusty and rotten weapons of an ancient armory. They are now reduced to, and the shop is supposed to be made up with about 150. But if the insipid simple waters and the fiery ungrateful compound waters shall be thrown aside, and the simple milk water, with 5 or 6 cordial tinctures, shall be kept for use, and the other tincture appointed by the physician, with respect to the circumstances of the patient, if only 3 or 4 syrups and conserves, and powders, and pills, and oils, and ointments, and PG 124 plaisters in that number, in imitation of the prudence and integrity of the foreign physicians who have contracted their dispensatories, shall be ordered, in the most rational and efficacious forms, to receive the addition of all the natural powders, balsams, gums, or the chimical medicines. The apothecary will have his trouble very much lessened, and with less expense. The patient will have his disease much sooner cured, and his life much better preserved. By this time we presume the reader is convinced that private interest too often influences many of our modern physicians, and makes them prescribe such medicines as tend most to the apothecary's gain, because the people give the apothecary power of appointing the physician. We have PG 125 shewn that those costly pretended medicines, which so much raise the sum in the bill, have no real virtue, that the greatest part of the most senative grow in our own gardens, that if some few are fetched from foreign parts, they are used in so small quantities that the doses are of the lowest price, and consequently you will very plainly see that the long and high-charged bill after a fit of sickness is more the effect of the collusion betwixt the doctor and apothecary, together with your own folly of desiring of it, than either the prices of the medicine or the necessity of so many doses. I dare say my reader now thinks it high time to take care of himself, to believe that the seldomer the physician or apothecary are employed, the less risque he runs in his health or PG 126 fortune, that he is not upon every slight indisposition or ordinary sickness to call upon their help, whereby very often the remedy proves worse than the disease, that your constitution will endeavor to preserve itself, and will affect it in most of the common distempers, but with ill medicines those will become dangerous, and will be made every day more malignant. Take the counsel of your most observing and experienced friend, who has no bias to divert him from the only care of your health, but avoid the empiric, who will, instead of procuring the ease of your thoughts and repose, and prescribing the rules of your diet, and permitting nature to subdue the disease, affright you with the greatest danger, disturb you, and fill your chamber, or both, PG 127, with the inflaming and pernicious cordials, the boluses and draughts, till he has cured his own distemper by the number of articles he shall enter into the bill. That it is in the power of every man to become his own physician, who needs no other helps of supporting a good and correcting a bad constitution than by observing a sober and regular life. There is nothing more certain than that custom becomes a second nature and has a great influence upon our bodies, and has too often more power over the mind than reason itself. The honestest man alive, in keeping company with libertines, by degrees forgets the maxims of probity he before was used to, and naturally falls into those vices with his companions. And if he be so happy as to acquit himself, PG 128, and to meet with better company, then virtue reassumes its first luster, and will triumph in its turn, and he insensibly regains the wisdom that he had abandoned. In a word, all the alterations that we perceive in the temper, carriage, and manners of most men have scarce any other foundation but the force and prevalency of custom. 'Tis an unhappiness in which the men of this age are fallen, that variety of dishes is now the fashion, and becomes so far preferable to frugality, and yet the one is the product of temperance, whilst pride and unrestrained appetite is the parent of the other. Notwithstanding the difference of their origin, yet prodigality is at present styled magnificence, generosity, and grandeur, and is pg 129 commonly esteemed of in the world, whilst frugality passes for avarice and sordidness in the eyes and acceptation of most men. Here is a visible error which custom and habit have established. The error has so far seduced us that it has prevailed upon us to renounce a frugal way of living, though taught us by nature, even from the first age of the world, as being that which would prolong our days, and has cast us into those excesses which serve only to abridge the number of them. We become old before we have been able to taste the pleasures of being young, and the time which ought to be the summer of our lives is often the beginning of their winter. We soon perceive our strength to fail, and weakness to come on pg 130 apace, and decline even before we come to perfection. On the contrary, sobriety maintains us in the natural state wherein we ought to be. Our youth is lasting, our manhood attended with a vigor that does not begin to decay till after many years. A whole century must be run out before wrinkles can be formed on the face, or gray hairs grow on the head. This is so true that when men were not addicted to voluptuousness, they had more strength and vivacity at fourscore than we have at present at 40. It cannot indeed be expected that every man should tie himself strictly to the observations of the same rules in his diet, since the variety of climates, constitution, age, and other circumstances, pg 131, may admit of variations. But this we may assert as a reasonable, general, and undeniable maxim, founded upon reason and the nature of things, that for the preservation of health and prolonging a man's life, it is necessary that he eat and drink no more than is sufficient to support his natural constitution, and on the contrary, whatsoever he eats and drinks beyond, that is superfluous, and tends to the feeding of the corrupt and vicious humors, which will at last, though they may be stifled for a time, break out into a flame and burn the man quite down, or else leave him like a ruinated or shattered building. This general maxim which we have laid down will hold good with respect to men of all ages and constitutions, and under pg 132, whatsoever climate they live, if they have but the courage to make a due application of it, and to lay a restraint upon their unreasonable appetites. After all, we dare not warrant that the most strict and sober life will secure a man from all diseases, or prolong his days to the greatest old age. Natural infirmities and weaknesses, which a man brings along with him into the world, which he derived from his parents and could not avoid, may make him sickly and unhealthful, notwithstanding all his care and precaution. And outward accidents, from which no man is free, may cut off the thread of life before it is half spun out. There is no fencing against the latter of those, but as to the former, a man may in some measure correct, and pg 133 amend them by a sober and regular life. In fine, let a man's life be longer or shorter, yet sobriety and temperance renders it pleasant and delightful. One that is sober, though he lives but 30 or 40 years, yet lives long and enjoys all his days, having a free and clear use of all his faculties, whilst the man that gives himself to excess and lays no restraint to his appetites, though he prolongs his life to 60 or 80 years, which is next to a miracle, yet is his life but one continued dosing slumber, his head being always full of fumes, the pores of his soul cloudy and dark, the organs of his body weak and worn out, and very unfit to discharge the proper offices of a rational creature. And indeed reason, if we hearken to it, will tell us that a good regimen is pg 134 necessary for the prolonging our days, and that it consists in two things, first in taking care of the quality, and secondly of the quantity, so as to eat and drink nothing that offends the stomach, nor any more than we can easily digest. And in this, experience ought to be our guide in those two principles, when we arrive to 40, 50, or 60 years of age. He who puts in practice that knowledge which he has of what is good for him and goes on in a frugal way of living, keeps the humors in a just temperature and prevents them from being altered, though he suffer heat and cold, though he be fatigued, though his sleep be broke, provided there be no excess in any of them. This being so, what an obligation does man lie under pg 135 of living soberly, and ought he not to free himself from the fears of sinking under the least in temperature of the air, and under the least fatigue, which makes us sick upon every slight occasion? 'Tis true, the most sober man may sometimes be indisposed, when they are unavoidably obliged to transgress the rule which they have been used to observe. But then they are certain their indisposition will not last above 2 or 3 days at most, nor can they fall into a fever. Weariness and faintness are easily remedied by rest and good diet. There are some who feed high and maintain that whatsoever they eat is so little a disturbance to them that they cannot perceive in what part of the body the stomach lies. But I aver, they do not speak as they think, nor is it pg 136 natural. 'Tis impossible that any created being should be of so perfect a composition, as that neither heat nor cold, dry nor moist should have any influence over it, and that the variety of food which they make use of different qualities, should be equally agreeable to them. Those men cannot but acknowledge that they are sometimes out of order. If it is not owing to a sensible indigestion, yet they are troubled with headaches, want of sleep, and fevers, of which they are cured by a diet, and taking such medicines as are proper for evacuations. It is therefore certain that their distempers proceed from repletion, or from their having eat or drank something which did not agree with their stomachs. Most old people excuse their high feeding by saying that it is pg 137 necessary to eat a great deal, to keep up their natural heat, which diminishes proportionably as they grow into years, and to create an appetite. 'Tis necessary to find out proper sauces, and to eat whatsoever they have a fancy for, and that without thus humoring their palates, they would be soon in their graves. To this I reply, that nature, for the preservation of a man in years, has so composed him that he may live with a little food, that his stomach cannot digest a great quantity, and that he has no need of being afraid of dying for want of eating, since when he is sick, he is forced to have recourse to a regular sort of diet, which is the first and main thing prescribed him by his physician, that if this remedy is of such efficacy to snatch us out of the arms pg 138 of death, 'tis a mistake to suppose that a man may not, by eating a little more than he does when he is sick, live a long time without ever being sick. Others had rather be disturbed twice or thrice a year with the gout, the sciatica, and their epidemical distempers, than to be always put to the torment and mortification of laying a restraint upon their appetites, being sure that when they are indisposed, a regular diet will be an infallible remedy and cure. But let them be informed by me that as they grow up in years their natural heat abates, that as regular diet, despised as a precaution and only looked upon as physic, cannot always have the same effect nor force to draw off the crudities, nor repair the disorders that are caused by repletion. And lastly, pg 139, that they run the hazard of being cheated by their hope and by their intemperance. Others say that it is more eligible to feed high and enjoy themselves, though a man live the less while. It is no surprising matter that fools and madmen should contemn and despise life. The world will be no loser whenever they go out of it, but 'tis a considerable loss when wise, virtuous, and holy men drop into the grave, who might have done more honor to their country and to themselves. In youth this excess is more frequent. Necessary therefore it is to moderate his appetite, for if the stomach be stretched beyond its due extent, it will require to be filled, but never well digest what it receives. Besides, it is much better to prevent diseases, pg 140, by temperance, sobriety, chastity, and exercise, than cure them by physic. Quid enim si medicis dederit, sapsum sibi erapit, summa medicinarum ad sanitatem corporis and annum abstinenti est. He that lives abstemiously, or but temperately, need not study the wholesomeness of his meat, nor the pleasantness of that sauce, the moments and punctilios of air, heat, cold, exercise, lodging, diet, nor is critical in cookery or in his liquors, but takes thankfully what God gives him. Especially, let all young men forbear wines and strong drinks, as well as spiced and hot meats, for they introduce a preternatural heat in the body, and at least hinder and obstruct, if not at length exhaust the natural. PG 141, but if overtaken by excess, it's difficult to be always upon our guard. The last remedy is vomiting or fasting it out, neither go to bed on a full stomach. Let physic be always the last remedy, that nature may not trust to it. For though a sick man leaves all for nature to do, he hazards much, but when he leaves all for the doctor to do, he hazards more. And since there is a hazard both ways, I would sooner rely upon nature. For this at least we may be sure of, that she is as honest as she can, and that she does not find the account in prolonging the disease. Others there are, who perceiving themselves to grow old, though their stomach be less capable of digesting well every day less than another, yet will not upon that account abate anything of their PG 142 diet. They only abridge themselves in the number of their meals, and because they find 2 or 3 meals a day is troublesome, they think their health is sufficiently provided. For by making only 1 meal, that so the time between one repast and another may, as they say, facilitate the digestion of those aliments which they might have taken at twice. For this reason they eat as much at 1 meal, that their stomach is overcharged and out of order, and converts the superfluities of its nourishment into bad humors, which engender diseases and death. I never knew a man live long by this conduct. These men would doubtless have prolonged their days, had they abridged the quantity of their ordinary food proportionally as they grew in PG 143 years, and had they eat a great deal less a little oftener. Some again are of opinion that sobriety may indeed preserve a man in health, but does not prolong his life. To this we say that there have been persons in past ages who have prolonged their lives by this means, and some there are at present who still do it. For as infirmities contracted by repletion shorten our days, a man of an ordinary reach may perceive that if he desires to live long, it is better to be well than sick, and that consequently temperance contributes more to long life than excessive feeding. Whatsoever sensualists may say, temperance is of infinite benefit to mankind. To it he owes his preservation. It banishes from his mind the dismal apprehensions of dying. Teased by its means, he PG 144 becomes wise, and arrives to an age wherein reason and experience furnish him with assistance to free himself from the tyranny of his passions, which have lorded it over him for almost the whole course of his life. A very notable instance of this we have in the life of Louis Cornaro, a noble Venetian, who though of a weakly constitution, increased by a voluptuous life, yet at the age of 35 or 40 years, he was resolved to practice in all the rules of sobriety and temperance, and to withdraw from those excesses that had brought upon him those usual ills, the gout and the colic, fatal attendants to an indolent and luxurious life, and which reduced him to so low a state that his recovery was despaired of by the wisest physician. And here he tells you that he PG 145 was born very choleric and hasty, and flew out into a passion for the least trifle, that he huffed all mankind, and was so intolerable that a great many persons of repute avoided his company. He apprehended the injury which he did to himself. He knew that anger is a real frenzy, that it disturbs our judgment, that it transports us beyond ourselves, and that the difference between a passionate and a mad man is only this, that the latter has lost his reason, and the former is only deprived of it by fits. A sober life cured him of his frenzy. By its assistance, he became so moderate and so much a master of his passions that no body could perceive it was born with him. How great and valuable must temperance then be, which carries that sovereign aid, and can PG 146 relieve the passions of the mind, and not only to expel the bad humors of the body, but also to restore it to a due tone and a full state of health. Now let anyone upon a serious reflection consider which is most eligible, a sober and regular, or an intemperate and disorderly course of life. This is certain, that if all men would live regularly and frugally, there would be so few sick persons, that there would hardly be any occasion for remedies. Si tibi deficient medici, medici tibi fiant. HC Tria, mens LTA, requis moderata dieta. The best and safest physician is Dr. Diet, Dr. Merriman, and Dr. Quiets. Page 147. Everyone would become his own physician and would be convinced that he never met with a better. It would be to little purpose to study the constitution of other men. Everyone, if he would but apply himself to it, would always be better acquainted with his own than that of another. Everyone would be capable of making those experiments for himself which another could not do for him, and would be the best judge of the strength of his own stomach, and of the food which is agreeable thereto. For in one word, 'tis next to impossible to know exactly the constitution of another, their constitutions being as different as their complexions. Since no man, therefore, can have a better physician than himself, nor a more sovereign antidote than a regimen, that is to pg 148 study his own constitution, and to regulate his life according to the rules of right reason. I own, indeed, the disinterested physician may be sometime necessary, since there are some distempers which all human prudence cannot provide against. There happen some unavoidable accidents which seize us after such a manner, as to deprive our judgment of the liberty it ought to have to be a comfort to us. It may then be a mistake wholly to rely upon nature. It must be assisted, and recourse must be had to some one or another for it. And in this we have much the advantage of the irregular man, his vices having heaped fuel to the distemper. But on the contrary, by a regular course of life, the very cause is not to be found, and the disease retreats from you. Pg 149. And here the famed Cornaro, who being at 70 years of age, had another experiment of the usefulness of a regimen, and 'twas this: a business of extraordinary consequence drawing him into the country, and being in the coach, the horses ran away with him, and was overthrown, and dragged along away before they could stay the horses. They took him out of the coach with his head broke, a leg and arm out of joint, and in a word, in a very lamentable condition. As soon as they brought him home again, they sent for the physicians, who did not expect he should live 3 days to an end. However, they resolved upon letting of him blood to prevent the coming of a fever, which usually happens upon such cases. He was so confident that the regular life which pg 150 he had led had prevented the contracting of any ill humors of which he might be afraid, that he rejected their prescription, and ordered them to dress his head, to set his leg and arm, and to rub him with some specific oils proper for bruises, and without any other remedies he was soon cured, to the amazement of the physicians and of all those that knew him. From hence he did infer that a regular life is an excellent preservative against all natural ills, and that intemperance produces quite contrary effects. What a difference, then, between a sober and an intemperate life! The one shortens and the other prolongs our days, and makes us enjoy a perfect health, and with Juvenal, mens sana in corpore sano. I cannot understand how it comes pg 151 to pass, that so many people, otherwise prudent and rational, cannot resolve upon laying a restraint upon their insatiable appetites at 50 or 60 years of age, or at least when they begin to feel the infirmities of old age coming upon them, they might rid themselves of them by a strict diet and a due regimen. I do not wonder so much that young people are so hardly brought to such a resolution. They are not capable enough of reflecting, and their judgment is not solid enough to resist the charms of sense. But at 50 a man ought to be governed by his reason, which would convince us, if we would hearken to it, that to gratify all our appetites without any rule or measure is the way to become infirm and die young. Nor does pg 152 the pleasure of taste last long. It hardly begins, but 'tis gone and past. The more one eats, the more one may, and the distempers which it brings along with it last us to our graves. Now should not a sober man be very well satisfied when he is at table, upon the assurance that as often as he rises from it, what he eats will do him no harm? Who then would not perfectly enjoy the pleasures of this mortal life so perfectly? Who will not court and win sobriety, which is so grateful to God, as being the guardian to virtue and irreconcilable enemy to vice? Surely the example of this wise and good man deserves our imitation, that since old age may be made so useful and pleasant to men, I should have failed in point page 153 of charity to inform mankind by what methods they might prolong their days. A great assistant to that of sobriety, and which is highly conducive to the preservation of the whole man, is to renew with us that habitual and beneficial custom of the antients in promoting exercise as one great instrument to the conservation of health, and which no one can deny who has given himself the experience of a trial. That it promotes the digestion, raises the spirits, refreshes the mind, and that it strengthens and relieves the whole man is scarce disputed by any, but that it should prove curative in some particular distempers, and that too when scarce anything else will prevail, seems to obtain little credit with most people, who though they page 154 will give the physician the hearing when he recommends the use of riding or any other sort of exercise, yet at the bottom look upon it as a forlorn method, and rather the effects of his inability to relieve them than a belief that there is any great matter in what he advises. Thus, by a negligent diffidence, they deceive themselves, and let slip the golden opportunities of recovering by a diligent struggle what could not be cured by the use of medicine alone. But to give you a just and rational idea of its power of moving and actuating upon the body, let us consider the whole human system as a compound of tubes and glands, or to use a more rustic phrase, a bundle of pipes and strainers, fitted to one another after so wonderful a manner as to make a proper page 155 engine for the soul to work with. This description does not only comprehend the bowels, bones, tendons, veins, nerves, and arteries, but every muscle and every ligature, which is a composition of fibers, that are so many imperceptible tubes or pipes interwoven on all sides with invisible glands and strainers. This general idea of a human body, without considering it in the niceties of anatomy, let us see how absolutely necessary labor is for the right preservation of it. There must be frequent motions and agitations to mix, digest, and separate the juices contained in it, as well as to clear and cleanse that infinitude of pipes and strainers of which it is composed, and to give their solid parts a more firm and lasting tone. Exercise ferments the humors, page 156 casts them into their proper channels, throws off redundancies, and helps nature in those secret distributions without which the body cannot subsist in vigor nor act with cheerfulness. I might here mention the effects which this has upon the soul, upon all the faculties of the mind, by keeping the understanding clear, the imagination untroubled, and refining those spirits that are necessary for the proper execution of our intellectual faculties during the present laws of union between soul and body. It is a neglect in this particular that we must ascribe the spleen, which is so frequent in men of studious and sedentary tempers, as well as the vapors to which those of the other sex are so often subject. page 157 had not exercise been absolutely necessary for our well-being, nature would not have made the body so proper for it, by giving such an activity to the limbs, and such a pliancy to every part, as necessarily produce those compressions, extensions, contortions, dilatations, and all other kind of motions that are necessary for the preservation of such a system of tubes and glands as has been before mentioned. And that we might not want inducements to engage us in such an exercise of the body as is proper for its welfare, it is so ordered that nothing valuable can be procured without it. Not to mention riches and honor, even food and raiment are not to be come at without the toil of the hands and sweat of the brows. page 158 Providence furnishes us with materials, but expects we should work them up ourselves. The earth must be labored before it gives increase, and when it is forced into its several products, how many hands must they pass through before they are fit for use? Manufactures, trade, and agriculture naturally employ more than 19 parts of the species in 20, and as for those who are not obliged to labor, by the condition in which they are born, they are more miserable than the rest of mankind, unless they indulge themselves in that voluntary labor called exercise, of which there is no kind I would so recommend to both sexes as that of riding, as there is none that conduces so much to health, and is every way accommodated to the body. Dr. Sydenham is very page 159 lavish in its praises, and if you would learn the mechanical effects of it described at length, You may find it learnedly treated of by Dr. Fuller in a late treatise intituled Medicina Gymnastica, or The Power of Exercise, and here Mr. Dryden. The first physicians by debauch were made. Excess began, and sloth sustained the trade. By chase our long-lived fathers earned their food. Toil strung the nerves and purified the blood. But we their sons, a pampered race of men, are dwindled down to 80 years and 10. Better to hunt in fields for health unbought, than fee the doctor for a nauseous draught. The wise for cure on exercise depend. God never made his work for man to mend. Page 160. Page 161. General maxims for health, or rules to preserve the body to a good old age. 1. It is not good to eat too much, or fast too long, or do anything else that is preternatural. 2. Whoever eats or drinks too much will be sick. Pg 162 Roman 3. If thou art dull and heavy after meat, it's a sign thou hast exceeded the due measure, for meat and drink ought to refresh the body, and make it cheerful, not to dull and oppress it. 4. If thou findest those ill symptoms, consider whether too much meat or drink occasions it, or both, and abate by little and little, till thou findest the inconveniency. Remav 500. 5. Pass not immediately from a disordered life to a strict and precise life, but by degrees abate the excess, for ill customs arrive by degrees, and so must be wore off. Pg 163 Roman 6. As to the quality of the food, if the body be of a healthful constitution, and the meat does thee no harm, it matters little what it is, but all sorts must be avoided that does prejudice, though it please the taste never so much. 7. After diet is obtained, the appetite will require no more than nature hath need of, it will desire as nature desires. 8. Old men can fast easily, men of ripe age can fast almost as much, but young people and children can hardly fast at all. Pg 164 Roman 9. Let ancient people eat panada, made of bread and flesh broth, which is of light digestion, an egg now and then will do well. 10. Growing persons have a great deal of natural heat, which requires a great deal of nourishment, else the body will pine. 11. It must be examined what sort of persons ought to feed once or twice a day, more or less, allowance being always made to the person, to the season of the year, to the place where one lives, and to custom. 12. The more you feed foul bodies, the more you hurt yourselves. Pg 165 Roman 13. He that studies much ought not to eat so much as those that work hard, his digestion being not so good. 14. The near quantity and quality being found out, it is safest to be kept to. 15. Excess in all other things whatever, as well as in meat and drink, are to be avoided. Excessive heats and colds, violent exercises, late hours and women, unwholesome air, violent winds, the passions, and 100. 16. Youth, age, and sick require a different quantity. Pg 166 Roman 17. And so do those of different complexions, for that which is too much for a phlegmatic man is not sufficient for the choleric. 18. The measure of the food ought to be proportionable to the quality and condition of the stomach, because the stomach is to digest it. 19. The quantity that is sufficient, the stomach can perfectly concoct, and answers to the due nourishment of the body. 20. Hence it appears, we may eat a greater quantity of some viands than of others of a more hard digestion. Pg 167 Roman 21. The difficulty lies in finding out an exact measure, but eat for necessity, not pleasure, for lust knows not where necessity ends. 22. Wouldst thou enjoy a long life, a healthy body, and a vigorous mind, and be acquainted also with the wonderful works of God, labor in the first place to bring thy appetite to reason. 23. Beware of variety of meats, and such as are curiously and daintily dressed, which destroy a multitude of people. They prolong appetite 4 times beyond what nature requires, and different meats are of different natures. Some are sooner digested than PG 168 others, whence crudities proceed, and the whole digestion depraved. 24. Keep out of the sight of feasts and banquets as much as may be, for it is more difficult to retain good cheer when in presence than from the desire of it when it is away. The like you may observe in all the other senses. 25. Fancy that gluttony is not good and pleasant, but filthy, evil, and detestable, as it really is. 26. The richest food, when concocted, yields the most noisome smells, and he that works and fares hard hath a sweeter and pleasanter body than the other. PG 169 Roman 27 Winter requires somewhat a larger quantity than summer. Hot and dry meats agree best with winter, cold and moist with summer. In summer abate a little of your meat, and add to your drink, and in winter subtract from your drink, and add to your meat. 28. If a man casually exceeds, let him fast the next meal, and all may be well again, provided it be not often done. Or if he exceed at dinner, let him rest from, or make a slight supper. 29. Use now and then a little exercise 1/4 of an hour before meals, or swing your arms about with a small weight in each hand, to leap, and the like, for that stirs the muscles of the breast. PG 170 Roman 30 Shooting in the long bow, for the breast and arms. 31. Bowling for the reins, stone and gravel, and 100. 32. Walking for the stomach, and the great Drusus having weak and small thighs and legs, strengthen them by riding, and especially after dinner. 33. Squinting and a dull sight are amended by shooting. 34. Crookedness, by swinging and hanging upon the arms. PG 171 Roman 35 A temperate diet frees from diseases. Such are seldom ill, but if they are surprised with sickness, they bear it better and recover it sooner, for all distempers have their original from repletion. 36. A temperate diet arms the body against all external accidents, so that they are not so easily hurt by heat, cold, or labor. If they at any time should be prejudiced, they are more easily cured, either of wounds, dislocations, or bruises. It also resists epidemical diseases. 37. It makes men's bodies fitter for any employments. It makes men to live long. Galen, with many others, lived by it 100 years. PG 172, Roman 38. Galen saith that those that are weak complexioned from their mother's womb may, by the help of this art, which prescribes the coarse diet, attain to extreme old age, and that without diminution of senses or sickness of body. And he saith that though he never had a healthful constitution of body from his birth, yet by using a good diet after the 27th year of his age, he never fell into sickness, unless now and then into a 1 day's fever, taken by 1 day's weariness. 39. A sober diet makes a man die without pain. It maintains the senses in vigor. It mitigates the violence of passions and affections. PG 173 Roman 40. It preserves the memory. It helps the understanding. It allays the heat of lust. It brings a man to that weighty consideration of his latter end. PG 174. A discovery of some remarkable errors in the late writings of Dr. Mead, Quincy, Bradley, and 100 on the plague. The great apprehensions that all Europe has received from the dreadful and raging plague, which has lately destroyed the greatest part of the inhabitants of Marseille, PG 175, has given that just alarm to our ministry, who, under the direction of His Majesty, by their wise and prudent management, to the duty of public prayers, with that of a general and solemn fast throughout the kingdom, have not been wanting, as much as possible, to prevent that direful contagion which now threatens and might be brought amongst us by the sailors or by merchandise coming from places that are infected, and have ordered a strict quarantine to be observed by all ships in all the maritime ports liable to that invasion. And to be assistant to so great a work, the neglect of which the lives of the nation being at stake, we have some the most eminent of the physicians now in vogue, who from that duty to their profession and their zeal to PG 176, the public good, have published some essays, not only of the nature, cause, symptoms, prognostics, and affections of this fatal distemper, but likewise of the proper means to be used in preventing and fortifying against, with the proper applications of recovering those that are seized by this fatal enemy to mankind. Books of this kind lately published are A Short Discourse Concerning Pestilential Contagion by Dr. Mead, The Plague of Marseille considered by Dr. Bradley, Dr. Hodges's Limology of the Plague in London, Anno 1665, reprinted by Dr. Quincy, to which is added an essay of his own, with remarks of the infection now in France. To those worthy gentlemen are we indebted for their ready help, to their philosophical inquiries, their learned and analytical explanations in PG 177, all the stages of this raging ill, and farther, by what physical power it corrupts the blood, destroys the spirits, and is followed by death at the last. The apologies that are made in their preface, viz., of a short warning of their little leisure, the uncorrectness of style, and the typographical errors should be favorably construed from so great an aim of doing the public so great a good. And it would be esteemed a base ingratitude, merely for the sake of contradiction, to quarrel with the hand that directs, and may support us in the greatest extremity. But where there may be a sufficient reason to undeceive or amend such errors as might otherwise be prejudicial to their intended purpose of preserving the common weal, or advancing PG 178 some other necessary instructions which they have omitted, I can't but persuade myself that I shall have their approbation, if not their thanks, in prosecuting the advancement of that good end they so greatly have desired in their publications. It is very certain that S. of Dr. Hodges de Pest is the best of any hitherto published of that kind, and if the gentleman who has annexed his treatise to that of his own has taken care to remove the most affected peculiarities and luxuriances of his enthusiastic strain, he should have avoided that contagion himself, which are discovered in his crabbed and dogmatical terms of formal, miasms, miasmata, nexus, molecule, spicula, pabulum, and 100. Such terms being too abstruse and difficult to be understood PG 179 by the people in general, for whose instruction and benefit we have the charity to believe he undertook his publication. Nay, it cannot be doubted, and will need no confirmation by those that carefully peruse Dr. Hodges, but will find that there is scarcely any advanced method in what they have writ, or but what may be found in his treatise, unless in this one hint of Quincy, from the use of pulvis fluminans in dispersing the stagnate air, instead of the fusing of great guns, and 100. And he is no ways out in his policy, by tacking his own remarks with those of the good old doctors, which are the best recommendations of their passing to his own advantage. Hodges in his introduction tells you that the first discoveries of the late plague began in PG 180 Westminster, about the close of the year 1664, for at that season 2 or 3 persons died there, attended with like symptoms as manifestly declared their origin, that in the months of August and September the contagion changed its former slow and languid pace, having, as it were, got master of all, made a most terrible slaughter, so that 3, 4, or 5,000 died in a week, and once 8,000. Who can express the calamities of those times? None surely in more pathetic and bewailing accents than himself, who gives us so melancholy a description of their dismal misery, as affects the mind with the same passions and despairing sorrow they were then overloaded with, and as Virgil has it, horror ubique animos, simul ipsa silentia terrant. Atrent in fixi pector vultus. PG 181. The British nation wept for the miseries of her metropolis. In some houses carcasses lay waiting for burial, and in others, persons in their last agonies. In one room might be heard dying groans, in another the ravings of a delirium, and not far off relations and friends bewailing both their loss and the dismal prospect of their own sudden departure. Death was the sure midwife to all children, and infants passed immediately from the womb to the grave, who would not burst with grief to see the stock of a future generation hang upon the breasts of a dead mother, or the marriage bed changed the first night into a sepulchre, and the unhappy pair meet with death in the first embraces. Some of the infected run about staggering like drunken men, and fall, and PG 182 expire in the streets, while others lie half dead and comatose, but never to be waked but by the last trumpet. Some lie vomiting as if they had drank poison, and others fall dead in the market while they are buying necessaries for the support of life. Not much unlike was it in the following conflagration, where the altars themselves became so many victims, and the finest churches in the whole world carried up to heaven supplications in flames, while their marble pillars, wet with tears, melted like wax. Nor were monuments secure from the inexorable flames, where many of their venerable remains passed a second martyrdom. The most august palaces were soon laid waste, and the flames seemed to be in a fatal engagement to destroy the great PG 183 ornament of commerce. And the burning of all the commodities of the world together seemed a proper epitome of this conflagration. Neither Confederate crowns nor the drawn swords of kings could restrain its fanatic and rebellious rage. Large halls, stately houses, and the sheds of the poor were together reduced to ashes. The sun blushed to see himself set, and envied those flames the government of the night, which had rivaled him so many days. As the city, I say, was afterwards burnt without any distinction, in like manner did this plague spare no order, age, or sex. The divine was taken in the very exercise of his priestly office to be enrolled amongst the saints above, and some physicians, as before intimated, could not find assistance in their own antidotes, but died PG 184 in the administration of them too. Others, and although the soldiery retreated from the field of death and encamped out of the city, the contagion followed and vanquished them. Many in their old age, others in their prime, sunk under its cruelties. Of the female sex, most died, and hardly any children escaped, and it was not uncommon to see an inheritance pass successively to 3 or 4 heirs in as many days. The number of sextons were not sufficient to bury the dead. The bells seemed hoarse with continual tolling, until at last they quite ceased. The burying places would not hold the dead, but they were thrown into large pits dug in waste grounds in heaps, 30 or 40 together, and it often happened that those who attended the funerals of their friends one PG 185 evening were carried the next to their own long home. Quis talia fundo, temperat a lacrimis. About the beginning of September the disease was at the height, in the course of which month more than 12,000 died in a week 4, but from this time its force began to relax. And about the close of the year, that is, at the beginning of November, people grew more healthful, and such a different face was put upon the public, that although the funerals were yet frequent, yet many who had made most haste in retiring made the most to return, and came into the city without fear, insomuch that in December PG 186 they crowded back as thick as they fled, and although the contagion had carried off, as some computed, about 100,000 people, after a few months this loss was hardly discernible. The doctor himself comes to no determinate number of those that died of this distemper, but in the table that he has writ of the funerals in the several parishes within the bills of mortality of the cities of London and Westminster for the year 1665, he tells you 68,596 died of the plague. Dr. Mead in the same year 1665 that it continued in this city about 10 months and swept away 97,306 persons. Dr. Bradley in his table from the 27th of December 16,645 takes no notice of any buried of that distemper, but of one on the 14th of February following, and 2 on April the 25th, and in PG 187 all, to the 7th of June, 89. The next following months, to October the 3d, there were buried 49,932, in all 50,021. Why he should here break up from giving any further account may be from the weakness of his intelligence, which so widely differs from all other accounts, and in this one, with Dr. Hodges, who tells you that about the beginning of September, at which time the disease was at the height, in the course of which month, more than 12,000 persons died in a week, whereas in Bradley, the most that were buried in 1 week, from the 12th of September to the 19th, amounted to no more than 7165. But computing after the manner of Dr. Hodges, we find, taking 1 week with another, from August the 29th to the 27th of September, the time of its greatest fury, the exact PG 188 number of 6555, which falls short very near to 1/2 of the number accounted to be buried of that distemper by Dr. Hodges, and we have abundant reason to believe that the greatest account hitherto mentioned may be short of the number dying of that distemper. If we do but observe the strict order then published to shut up all infected houses, to keep a guard upon them day and night, to withhold from them all manner of correspondence from without, and that after their recovery, to perform a quarantine of 40 days, in which space if anyone else of the family should be taken with that distemper, the work to be renewed again, by which tedious confinement of the sick and well together, it often proved the cause of the loss of the whole. pg 189. These, besides many other great inconveniencies, were sufficient to affright the people from making the discovery, and we may be certain that many died of the plague, which were returned to the magistracy under another denomination, which might easily be obtained from the nurses and searchers, whether from their ignorance, respect, love of money, and 100, and if they vary so much in their computation of those that died, we shall find them as widely different in the time when Tees said the plague first began. The great Dr. Mead on this important subject may establish by his name whatever he lays down, with the same force and authority as the ancients held of that ipse dixit of Aristotle. But as that great master of nature was not pg 190 exempt from slipping into some errors and humanum est errare, it can be no shock to the reputation of this gentleman if we shall find him no less fallible than of some others of the faculty who has treated on this subject, and to this part of the time when Tees said the plague first began. Dr. Mead, by what information he has not thought fit to tell us, does affirm that its beginning was in autumn before the year 16,645, whereas Dr. Hodges says, in the very first page of his Leomologia, that it was not till the close of the year 1664. At that season 2 or 3 persons died suddenly in one family at Westminster, of which he gives a further light from his visiting the first patient in the Christmas holidays, and fully confirmed by the weekly bills of mortality, whose first account of pg 191, those who died of the plague, were from December the 27th, 16,645. As those gentlemen have forfeited their infallibility by what I have proved hitherto against them, we have further reason to suspect whether or not the late plague in 1665 was occasioned by that bale of cotton imported from Turkey to Holland, and thence to England, as Dr. Hodges makes irrefragable and Dr. Mead's authority indisputable, which is no less a subject of wonder and admiration how many years we have escaped from the plagues that have happened and are frequent in so many parts of Turkey, as at Grand Cairo, which is seldom or never free from that distemper, at Alexandria, Rosetta, Constantinople, Smyrna, Scanderoon, and Aleppo, from which places we have the most considerable import of any of our pg 192 neighbors, and of such goods as are most receptive of those infectious seeds, such as cotton, raw silk, mohair, and 100. And though coffee may seem less dangerous, from its quality of being more able to resist its pestilential effluvia, yet from the many coverings the bales are wrapped in, it is not hard to conceive the contagious power might be latent in some part of the package, which escape is the more surprising, and to be wondered at from the great increase of our trade and shipping, which yearly arrive from those countries, and yet to be preserved from the like misfortune near to this 60 years. Gacelius informs us, 5, that the contagion in the same year 1665 was brought into Germany pg 193 by a body of soldiers returning from the wars in Hungary against the Turks, spread the infection about Ulm and Augsburg, where he then lived, and besides the plague, they brought along with them the Hungarian and other malignant fevers, which diffused themselves about the neighborhood, whereof many died 6. And with submission to the wise judgment and opinion of these learned triumviri, who have cited no fuller authority for this assertion than a bare relation of it from Hodges de Pest, it may be no unreasonable conjecture to have its first progress from Hungary, Germany, and to Holland, from which last place they all have agreed we certainly received the contagion, and that we have had pg 194, the plague conveyed to us by the like means may be found in the Bibliotheca Anatomica, being brought to us by some troops from Hungary sent thither against the Turks by Henry VI. King of England. Dr. Mead, who thinks it necessary to premise somewhat in general concerning the propagation of the plague, might, to the three causes he has laid down, of a bad air, diseased persons, and goods transported from abroad, have added the aliment or diet, because affording matter to the juices, it does not less contribute to the generation of diseases. And it may be observed that in the year before the pestilential sickness, there was a great mortality amongst the cattle from a very wet autumn, and their carcasses being sold amongst the ordinary people at a very mean price. A PG 195 great many putrid humours might proceed from thence. And this, in the opinion of many, was the source of our late calamities, when it was observed this fatal destroyer raged with greater triumph over the common people, and the feeding on unripened and unsound fruits are frequently charged with a share in mischiefs of this kind. Galen 7 is very positive in this matter, and in one place accuses his great master to Hippocrates with neglecting the consequence of too mean a diet. From this, 'tis generally observed that a dearth or famine is the harbinger to a following plague. And we have an account from our merchants trading to Surat, Bengali, and some other parts of the East Indies, that the natives are PG 196 never free from that distemper, which is imputed to their low and pitiful fare. The Europeans, especially the English, escaping by their better diet, by feeding on good flesh, and drinking of strong generous wine, which secures them from the power of that malignancy. Their hypotheses as widely differ in the very substance or nature of the pestilence, and Dr. 9 Hodges, 10 Mead, and 11 Quincy have asserted that it proceeds from a corruption of the volatile salts or the nitrous spirit in the air. Dr. 12 Bradley, from the number of poisonous animals, insects, or maggots which at that time are swimming or driving in the circumambient air, and being PG 197 sucked into our bodies along with our breath, are sufficiently capable of causing those direful depredations on mankind called the plague. Both these opinions are supported by the authorities of learned men. And if Hodges and 100 have the suffrages of the greatest of the ancient physicians, with those of Wolfius, Agricola, Forestus, Fernelius, Bellini, Carolus de la Font, and 100, Bradley may challenge to him the famed Kircher, Malhigius, Leeuwenhoek, Morgagni, Riddy, and Mangetus. It is almost endless, as well as altogether needless, to cite all the authorities for the different opinions that might be collected from the most remote antiquity down to the present age. And although it is yet to be contested, and might be held an occult quality with those learned PG 198 gentlemen, we shall find each doctor passes his favorite opinion upon the world with as much infallibility as a demonstration in Euclid. Page 200 Dr. Bradley, who hatches this distemper by the smaller kind of insects floating in the air, is greatly jealous of his favorite egg, from which that fatal cockatrice breaks forth and disperses death in every quarter. He may be seen to promote this hypothesis in that discourse of his New Improvement of Planting and 100, and with no less pursuit in his late pamphlet on the plague at Marseille, where in his preface, p. 13, he tells you that to suppose this malignant distemper is occasioned by vapors only arising from the earth is to lay aside our reason and 100. And it may be farther observed that they are as remote from their consent to one another as in the distant place from whence they would trace its origin. PG 20116 Dr. Mead, from a bare transcription of Matthes Villanus, does affirm that the plague in the year 1346 had its first rise in China, advancing through the East Indies, Syria, Turkey, and 100, and by shipping from the Levant, brought into Europe, which in the year 1349 seized England. This is directly against Dr. Bradley 17, who suggests the plague is nowhere to be found in India, China, the south parts of Africa and America, and has taken the pains in filling up 3 pages in the defense of this assertion. It would be well if their opposition ended here, but when it affects us more near, when their difference becomes more wide in the very means of our preservation, and what by one is laid PG 202 down as a sovereign and real good, to be returned by another as the most fatal and destructive, is a weight of no small consequence, nor a less melancholy reflection, if it should please God to inflict us with the same calamities. And as to those preservative means, which the government have only a power to direct, the making of large fires in the streets, as has been practiced in the times of contagion, is a point largely contested. Dr. Hodges 18 seems inveterate against this custom and tells us that before 3 days were expired after the fires made in 1665, the most fatal night ensued, wherein more than 4,000 expired. The heavens both PG 203 mourned so many funerals and wept for the fatal mistake, so as to extinguish even the fires with their showers. May posterity, says he, be warned by this mistake, and not like empirics, apply a remedy where they are ignorant of the cause. And Dr. Mead 19 has an eye to this remark, when he tells us, the fatal success of the trials in the last plague is more than sufficient to discourage any farther attempts of this nature. Whereas, on the contrary, the making of fires in the streets were practiced from the greatest antiquity, and supported by Mayerne, Butler, and Harvey in the 2 great plagues before the year 1665, and recommended by Dr. Quincy 20 for the dissipation of PG 204 pestilential vapors, and 100. And without all manner of dispute, Dr. Bradley 21 must be wholly on his side when he tells us that the year 1665 was the last that we can say raged in London, which might happen from the destruction of the city by fire the following year 1666, and besides the destroying of the eggs or seeds of those poisonous animals that were then in the stagnating air, might likewise purify the air in such a manner as to make it unfit for the nourishment of others of the same kind, which were swimming or driving in the circumambient air. What has been said of fires is likewise to be understood of firing of guns, which some have 2 PG 205 rashly advised. Says Dr. Mead 22, the proper correction of the air would be to make it fresh and cool. And here quotes from the practice of the Arabians out of Res de Re Medica and 100. Dr. Quincy 23, that as the air being still, and as it were stagnate at such times, and as it favors the collection of poisonous effluvia, and aggravates infection, thinks it more effectual to let off small parcels of the common pulvis fulminans, which must afford a greater shock to the air by its explosion than by the largest pieces of ordnance. In favor of which last assertion, the experience both of soldiers will justify the firing of great guns and ordnance, which is frequently used in camps, for the dissipation PG 206 of the collected pestilential atoms, which by concussion, as well as its constituent parts of nitre and sulfur, tend greatly to the purification of the grosser atmosphere within the compass of their activity, and by the seamen in their voyages in the southern parts of the world, when sometimes the air is so gross, and hangs so low upon them, as to be almost suffocated. And in the late plague at Marseilles, the constant firing of great guns at morning and evening, by the appointment of Monsieur le Marquis de Langeron, their governor, was esteemed of great relief to the inhabitants. Nay, their contest will not end in a pipe of tobacco, against which Dr. Hodges 24 declares PG 207 himself a professed enemy. But whether, says he, we regard the narcotic quality of this American henbane, or the poisonous oil which exhales from it in smoking, or that prodigious discharge of spittle which it occasions, and which nature wants for many other important occasions, besides the aptitude of the pestilential poison to be taken down along with it, he chose rather to supply its place with sack. Dr. Bradley 25 redeems it from this low character, and represents it as a great antidote in the last plague, anno 1665. The distemper did not reach those who smoked tobacco every day, but particularly it was judged best to smoke in a morning. PG 208, he farther gives you an account of a famous physician, who in the pestilential time took every morning a cordial to guard his stomach, and after that a pipe or two before he went to visit his patients. At the same time he had an issue in his arm, by which, when it begun to smart, he knew he had received some infection, as he says, and then had recourse to his cordial and his pipe. By this means only he preserved himself, as several others did at that time by the same method. I could heartily wish those worthy gentlemen had struck in with greater harmony to the satisfaction and security of the people, whose expectations were greatly raised by the hopes of their assistance, by gaining a greater light into the nature, quality, PG 209 symptoms, and affections of this definitive ill, to have promoted their safety by giving the necessary indications relating to the cure, as well as the necessary precautions in order to guard us from that secret attack which may approach us by very minute and unheeded causes, the which, from their different notions and positive contradictions, lay too deep from the narrow researches of those philosophizing and learned gentlemen, and for the manner whereby it kills, its approaches are generally so secret, that persons seized with it seem to be fallen into an ambuscade or a snare, of which there was no manner of suspicion. And there are very few discourses relating to the pestilence, but what abound in many instances of this kind. And the learned Barcase, in his admirable description of the plague at pg 210 Florence, quoted by Dr. Mead 26 anno 1348, relates what himself saw, that two hogs finding in the streets some rags which had been thrown off from a poor man dead of the disease, after snuffling upon them and tearing them with their teeth, fell into convulsions and died in less than an hour. The misfortune which happened in the island of Bermudas about 25 years since, which account is from Dr. Halley. A sack of cotton, put ashore by stealth, lay above a month without any prejudice to the people of the house where it was hid. But when it came to be distributed among the inhabitants, it carried such a contagion along with it, that the living scarce sufficed to bury the dead. And Dr. Quincy 27 has somewhere read a strange story in pg 211 Baker's Chronicle, of a great rot amongst sheep, which was not quite rooted out until about 14 years' time, that was brought into England by a sheep bought for its uncommon largeness, in a country then infected with the same distemper. Fracastorius 28, an eminent Italian physician, tells us that in the year 1511, when the Germans were in possession of Verona, there arose a deadly disease amongst the soldiers, from the wearing only of a coat purchased for a small value, for it was observed that every owner of it soon sickened and died, until at last the cause of it was so manifestly known from some infection in the coat, that it was ordered to be burned. 10,000 persons, he says, were computed to fall by this plague before it ceased. pg 212, and Kefil, in his Medella Pestilenti, printed anno 1665, acquaints us that the following plagues were produced from the following causes. That in the year 1603, the contagious seeds were brought to England amongst seamen's clothes in Whitechapel, and in that year there died of the plague 30,561. That in the year 1625 was bred and produced by rotten mutton at Stepney, of which died 35,403 persons. That in the year 1630 was brought to us by a bale of carpets from Turkey, of which died 1317 persons. That in the year 1636 was brought over to us by a dog from Amsterdam, of which died 10,400 persons. That in the year 1665 was brought from Turkey in a bale of cotton to Holland, thence to pg 213 England. In this great plague died no less than 100,000 people. And at Marseille, in this present year 1720, the plague has swept away more than 70,000 persons, which was brought in goods from Sidon, a famed and ancient city and seaport in Phoenicia, and the same which sometimes is mentioned in Holy Writ. From the neighborhood of this last contagion, the frightful apprehensions of the people are raised to the greatest height, and when every one is consulting his own security, how to guard and preserve himself from that dreadful enemy, nothing can come more seasonably to their relief than to lay before them a compendium of the best and approved rules for their conduct, to which end I have carefully collected, from the successful practice of Dr. Glisson, Sir Thomas Millington, Dr. Charlton, and other pg 214 learned physicians in the last plague, with what only may be of use from the abounding prescripts of those who have lately published. And as this evil is supported throughout the general practice, it appears to be the result of the reasoning of some of the learned sons of Scapegoat, to marshal into the field as many compositions, as if only by their number they might be able to pull down the tyranny of this fatal destroyer. It would be a work insuperable, and altogether foreign to the method I have gone by, to extract all the medicines which some writers abound with for this end. It is our business here chiefly to take notice of that saving regimen, that rule of self-governing, which proved more successful in the preservation of the people in the late plague than all the abounding nostrums that have been crowded into the practice, the PG 215, which has become a due reproach to the faculty. Turp est doctori, quem culpa redarguit ipsum. And it is here worthy of our first remark, that the last plague in the year 1665, as well from the late accounts we have of that at Marseille, the poorer sort of people were those that mostly suffered, which can only be attributed to their mean and low fare, whereas the most nutritive and generous diet should be promoted, and such as generate a warm and rich blood, plenty of spirits, and what easily perspires, which otherwise would be apt to ferment and generate corruption. Your greatest care is to have your meat sweet and good, neither too moist nor flashy, having a certain regard to such as may create an easy digestion, and observing that roasted meats on those occasions should be preferred, as PG 216 beef, mutton, lamb, venison, turkey, capon, pullet, chicken, pheasant, and partridge, but pigeon and most sort of wild and sea fowl to be rejected, salt meats to be cautiously used, all hot, dry, and spicy seasonings to be avoided, most pickles and rich sauces to be encouraged, with the often use of garlic, onion, and shallot, the cool, acid, and acrid herbs and roots, as lettuce, spinach, cresses, sorrel, endive, and celery, all windy things which are subject to putrefaction to be refrained, as all kind of pulse, cabbage, cauliflower, sprouts, melons, cucumbers, and 100, as also most summer fruits, excepting mulberries, quinces, pomegranates, raspers, cherries, currants, and strawberries, which are of service when moderately eat of. All light and viscid substances to be avoided, as pork, most sorts PG 217 of fish, of the latter that may be eat, are soles, plays, flounder, trout, gudgeon, lobster, crayfish, and shrimps, no sort of pond fish being good, and for your sauce, fresh, melted butter or oil mixed with vinegar or verjuice, the juice of sorrel, pomegranates, barberries of lemon or Seville orange, which two last are to be preferred, from their power of resisting all manner of putrefaction, as well to cool the violent heat of the stomach, liver, and 100. For your bread to be light, and rather stale than new, not to drink much of malt liquors, avoiding that which is greatly hopped, or too much on the ferment. Mead and metheglin are of excellent use, and good wines taken moderately are a strong preservative, sack especially being accounted the most sovereign and the greatest alexipharmic. Excess is dangerous to the most PG 218 healthy constitution, which may beget inflammations of fatal consequence in pestilential cases. Let none go home fasting, every one, as they can procure, to take something as may resist putrefaction. Some may take garlic with bread and butter, a clove 2 or 3, or with rue, sage, sorrel, dipped in vinegar, the spirit of oil of turpentine frequently. Drank in small doses is of great use, as also to lay in steep overnight, of sage well bruised 2 handfuls, of wormwood 1 handful, of rue half a handful, put to them in an earthen vessel 4 quarts of mild beer, which in the morning to be drank fasting. The custom that prevails now of drinking coffee, boheti, or chocolate, with bread and butter, is very good. At their going abroad, teas proper to carry rue, angelica, masterwort, myrtle, scordianum PG 219, or water-germander, wormwood, valerian, or setwell root, Virginian, snake root, or zeduary in their hands to smell to, or of rue 1 handful stamped in a mortar, put thereto vinegar enough to moisten it, mix them well, then strain out the juice, wet a piece of sponge or a toast of brown bread therein, tie it in a bit of thin cloth to smell to. But there is nothing more grateful and efficacious than the volatile sal ammoniac, well impregnated with the essential oils of aromatic ingredients, which may be procured dry and kept in small bottles, from a careful distillation of the common sal volatile olasum. Sometimes more effted substances agree better with some persons than the more grateful scents, of which the most useful compositions may be made of rue, featherfew, galbanum, asafoetida, and the like, with the oil PG 220 of wormwood, the spirit or oil drawn and dropped upon cotton, so kept in a close ivory box, though with caution to be used, the often smelling to, dilating the pores of the olfactory organs, which may give greater liberty for the pestilential air to go along with it. A piece of orris root kept in the mouth in passing along the streets, or of garlic, orange or lemon peel, or clove, are of very great service, as also lozenges of the following composition, which are always profitable to be used fasting. Of citron peel 2 drams, zedoary angelica of each, prepared in rose vinegar, half a dram, citron seeds, wood of aloes, orris, of each 2 scruples, saffron, cloves, nutmeg, 1 scruple, myrrh, ambergris, of each 6 grains, sugar candy 1 ounce. Make into lozenges with gum tragacanth and rose water. PG 221, I know not indeed a greater neglect than not keeping the body clean, and the keeping at a distance anything superfluous and offensive, to keep the house airy and fresh, and moderately cool, and to strew it with herbs, rushes, and boughs, which yield refreshing scents, and contribute much to the purifying of the air, and resisting the infection. Of this kind all sorts of rushes and water flags, mint, balm, chamomile grass, hyssop, thyme, pennyroyal, rue, wormwood, southernwood, tansy, costmary, lime tree, oak, beech, walnut, poplar, ash, willow, and 100. A frequent change of clothes, and a careful drying or airing them abroad, with whisking and cleaning of them from all manner of filth and dust, which may harbor infection, as it is likewise to keep the windows open at sunrise till the setting, especially to the north and east, for the cold blasts from those quarters temper the malignity of pestilential airs. PG 222, preservative fumigations are largely talked of by all on those occasions, and they with good reason deserve to be practiced. And of the great number of aromatic roots and woods, I should chiefly prefer storax, benjamin, frankincense, myrrh, and amber, the wood of juniper, cypress, and cedar, the leaves of bays and rosemary, and the smell of tar and pitch is no ways inferior to any of the rest, where its scent is not particularly offensive, observing the burning of any or more of those ingredients at such proper distances of time from each other, that the air may always be sensibly impregnated therewith. Amongst the simples of the vegetable kind, Virginian snakeroot cannot be too much admired, and is deservedly accounted the most diaphoretic and alexipharmic for expelling the pestilential poison. Its dose, finely powdered, is from 4 or 6 grains PG 223 to 2 scruples in a proper vehicle, due regard being had to the strength and age of the patient. The next is generally given to the contrieva root, from which also a compound medicine is admirably contrived, and made famous by its success in the last plague. The dose of this in fine powder is from 1 scruple to a dram in angelica or scordium water, or in wine, and 100. There are other roots likewise of which many valuable compounds are formed in order to effect that with an united force which they could not do singly. In this class are the roots of angelica, scorzonera, butterbur, masterwort, tormentil, zedoary, garlic, elecampane, valerian, birthwort, gentian, bitany, and many others, which may be found in other writings. Ginger, whether in the root, powdered, and candied, deserve our regard, for it is very powerful both to raise a breathing sweat and defend PG 224 the spirits against the pestilential impression. From these roots may be made extracts, either with spirit of wine or vinegar, for it is agreed by all that the most subtle particles collected together and divested of their grosser and unprofitable parts become more efficacious in medicinal cases. The leaves of vegetables most used in practice are scordium, rue, sage, veronica, the lesser catori, scabious, pimpernel, marigolds, and balm, from which on occasion several formal are contrived. Good vehicles to wash down and to facilitate the taking of many other medicines should be made of the waters distilled from those herbs while they are fresh and fragrant, having not yet lost their volatile salt, for those which are commonly kept in the shop are insipid and of little use. Vinegar.